Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today we're heading deep into the Lone Star State of place, where the highways stretch forever. The small towns hide their secrets well, and the night shift can turn deadly without warning. From silent zone traps under Houston's overpasses to patrol calls that end in pure terror. These are 20 of the most disturbing, true-feel police horror stories from Texas. Encounters that will make you question what's real, and what's stalking just beyond the reach of your flashlight. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. By doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because today's just the beginning. The terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the horror is only getting started, and what's coming next will stay with you long after the last story ends. The call came in a little after midnight, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stiffen before you even put the radio down. A lone vehicle spotted on Farm Road 666, parked on the shoulder with no hazards, no lights. It's just sitting there like it had run out of breath. Out here in Nueces County, in the dead stretch between Bishop and the River Flats, that's not entirely unheard of. But tonight the air had a weight too. It humid but still, like the whole world was holding its breath. I'd been running patrol for 8 years, and I'd learned that kind of stillness was rarely a friend. When I rolled up to the mile marker dispatch gave me, the pickup was gone. Just dust in the beam of my headlights and the faintest twin grooves in the Khalees shoulder where its tires had been. Fresh ones. Tooth of sand hadn't had time to settle back into them. I called it in, voice low even though I was alone. Dispatch. Unit 12. No visual on the vehicle. Got fresh tracks leading eastbound, off-road. Looks like they left maybe 2-3 minutes before I arrived. Static answered first, then Brenda's voice tinny and calm. Copy, Unit 12. No other units in your area. Proceed with caution. I eased my cruiser onto the shoulder, nose toward the tracks. The twin lines cut off the road and wound into scrubland, toward the Mesquite and Prickly Pear. My gut told me this wasn't just some drunk ranch hand who missed his turn. You work these roads long enough, you start to feel the difference between human scoops and something else. And something else was all over this. I flicked on my spotlight, the beam sweeping over thorn brush and low grass, catching the pale shine of spider eyes and the dull, cracked green of cactus pads. The tracks were easy to follow at first, cutting through dry ground until the mesquite closed in tighter. I shifted into low gear and crawled along, tires crunching over limestone chips. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped once, then went silent. Like it remembered it was supposed to be afraid. A mile in, the spotlight caught the back end of the pickup. Old Ford, paint sun-faded to the color of a red dirt road, one taillight hanging loose on its wire, driver's door wide open. I called out from my window before I even thought about stepping out. Nueces County Sheriff's Office. Hello. My voice felt small in that open space, like it got swallowed up before it could go 20 feet. No answer. I parked at an angle. Cruiser lights washing the scene in red and blue, the shadows swinging like they were alive. The inside of the cab looked empty. No keys, no wallet, just an old ball cap on the passenger seat and a scattering of dirt on the floorboard, like someone had climbed in with muddy boots. The ground around the truck told more than the inside. Did boot prints, one set leading deeper into the brush. It's not a stagger, not a run. It's just a steady walk, like whoever it was had somewhere to be. I let dispatch know I was on foot and started following. The crunch of my boots was loud in the silence, and after about 100 yards, even the crickets seemed to quit. The beam of my flashlight painted the ground in front of me, and for a second I thought the prints had doubled back. No, they just stopped. The sand ahead of them was smooth, undisturbed, like the person had stepped forward into nothing. I was turning to head back when I caught at the faint glow of headlights, way off behind me, coming slow through the brush. Relief hit first, thinking maybe another unit had come to back me up without calling it in. But when I thumbed my radio, Brenda cut me off before I could ask. Unit 12, be advised. You are the only marked vehicle within 5 miles. No other units dispatched to your location. My mouth went dry. The lights were closer now, weaving between the mesquite. Just 2 orbs of pale gold that seemed to float too high off the ground, too steady for the terrain. I raised my flashlight and shined it toward them. No engine noise came back. No crunch of tires, just the lights, closing the distance without sound. I backed toward the truck, my hand settling on the grip of my sidearm. The lights dimmed for a heartbeat, like whoever it was had dipped behind a stand of brush. Then they flared again closer. Now, so close, I should have been able to see the grille, the outline of a hood, something. But there was nothing, just the lights hanging in the darkness, maybe 30 yards away. That's when the smell hit me. Not exhaust, not gasoline. Something older, thicker like wet earth turned over after years, like the inside of a root cellar. It seemed to push the air out of my lungs. I blinked, and the lights went out, just gone. The silence that followed was worse than the sight of them. Every instinct I had screamed to get in my cruiser and go. I backed all the way to the Ford, eyes on the black where the lights had been. My boot brushed something hard. I looked down. It was a small wooden cross, the kind you see marking roadside graves, weathered gray, nails rusted. It hadn't been there when I walked past before. Picked it up without thinking, and the wood felt damp and cold, like it had been soaking in water. By the time I got back to my cruiser, my hands were shaking. I called it in as an abandoned vehicle and started the slow roll back to the road. About halfway, my rearview mirror caught a flash of light, those same pale orbs, now right behind my bumper. My speedometer climbed, 50, 60. The lights stayed with me, never swaying, never falling back. I couldn't hear a thing, not even my own engine. Just the pounding in my chest. When I hit the asphalt again, I risked a glance in the mirror. The road behind me was empty, black stretching all the way to the horizon. No dust, no lights, nothing. I pulled over once I hit the main highway, headlights on the empty westbound lanes, and just sat there until my breathing came back under control. Brenda's voice crackled through the radio, gentle like she knew I'd seen something. Unit 12, status check. Told her I was fine. I lied. Back at the station, I filed the report as nothing more than an abandoned vehicle. The Ford. Got towed before sunrise? The tow driver said the ignition had been stripped years ago, like it hadn't run in a long time. No sign of the driver, no boot prints after the point I'd seen them. 2 days later, I was driving that same stretch. On the way home, the sun was low, the light going gold through the mesquite. Out of habit, my eyes went to the shoulder where the truck had been. There was something there now. A small wooden cross, weathered gray, nails rusted, leaning slightly to one side. Just like the one I'd picked up, only this one had my name carved into it. I've been wearing a badge in Bexar County for over a decade, and I can tell you this. Most calls you hear about on the police. Scanner don't turn into anything worth remembering. You roll up, take a statement, maybe write up a report, and you're back in the cruiser before your coffee's even cooled. But every so often, you get one that wedges itself into your brain like a splinter under your fingernail. Something you can't dig out no matter how much you try to forget it. It was a Tuesday night in late September. It's the kind of night where the air feels sticky and heavy, even though the sun's long gone. The kind of night where your shirt clings to your back just from walking to the car. My partner Ramirez was off sick, so I was running solo. I'd been killing time near the outskirts of the city, driving the slower neighborhoods that skirt the farm roads, those half-forgotten edges where San Antonio starts to bleed into the dark stretches of Medina County. That's when dispatch called in. Unit 43. Suspicious person reported. Cloudcroft Drive, number 216. Caller says someone's been sitting on her porch for over an hour, hasn't moved. Porch light is on. I remember thinking it was probably just some drunk who'd picked the wrong address to pass out at. Cloudcroft's one of those older neighborhoods, post-war single-story houses. Big porches, sagging wooden fences. A lot of retirees, a few young families, not the kind of place you expect trouble. I turned off onto Cloudcroft about 15 minutes later. It's a narrow street with patchy asphalt, and every house had its porch light on except one. Number 216. Instead, above the steps, there was a single deep red bulb glowing like a dying ember in the dark. I pulled the cruiser over across the street and radioed in my arrival. The porch was small, with a wooden swing on one side and a rocking chair on the other. In the chair, facing out toward the street, was someone, a man. I thought at first, sitting so still he could have been carved from stone. The air felt wrong before I even crossed the street. Not cold Texas nights in September don't do cold, but like the humidity had turned heavy and stale. I stepped up the curb, flashlight in hand. Bexar County Sheriff's Office, I called. "Sir, you doing all right tonight?" It's a figure. Didn't move. I got closer and noticed the way the shadows played over his skin. Except it didn't look like skin. It was too pale, too smooth, almost waxy under the red light. I came up the steps slow, my boots creaking on the old boards. My flashlight caught the edge of his face and the shine of glassy, unblinking eyes. His mouth was slack, lips slightly parted, but there was no breath. I leaned in just enough to see his chest wasn't moving at all. Then the chair rocked forward. I swear to I didn't touch it. I wasn't even close enough. Just a gentle rock forward, then back, creaking like an old metronome. My stomach went tight. That's when I saw the chain on the front door. It wasn't hanging inside, like you'd expect. It was looped through. The bracket on the outside of the door, padlocked. Every instinct told me to call for backup, but I couldn't make myself look away. The man's head turned slowly, unnaturally, until his face was pointed at me. The glassy eyes caught the red light, and for a split second, I could have sworn they reflected like an animal's in a beam. "Sir," I said again, my voice tighter, "gonna need you to stand up." He didn't. Instead, he gave this slow smile. But it wasn't warm or human. It was like his mouth was remembering what smiling was supposed to look like. I keyed the radio. "Dispatch, I'm gonna need another unit at 216 Cloudcroft." Possible unresponsive static cut me off. No voice, no confirmation, just a deep, low hiss. When I looked back at the chair, it was empty. I froze and blinked more. Then a second. The seat was still rocking, and the front gate was closed. There was no place for him to have gone without me seeing it. I swept the yard with my flashlight, nothing. The neighbor's dog was barking now, high and frantic, like it was losing its mind. My pulse was hammering in my ears, but I forced myself toward the door. I thought maybe someone inside was hurt, that this was some sick distraction. The chain was still padlocked, so I went around to the side of the house. The grass was long and damp, and my boots left deep impressions. A side window was cracked open. I knocked and called out. No answer. I pushed it up and climbed through into a dark kitchen that smelled like mildew and copper. My flashlight beam caught on a Formica counter, littered with unopened mail, all postmarked weeks ago. The living room was worse. Every piece of furniture had been covered in white sheets, and there was dust thick enough to choke on. But on the coffee table, in the middle of the room, was a black box. It was a cruiser dash cam. It's our standard issue. It had a property tag from Bexar County. Mine, except my dash cam was still bolted to my cruiser across the street. I didn't touch it. Something about the way it was sitting there, dead center, like it had been placed for me to find, made my skin crawl. I backed toward the front door, meaning to check it from the inside. But the chain was gone. The bracket was still there. The screws clean and new, like they'd been replaced yesterday. But the chain and lock were gone, as if they'd never existed. Rocking chair creaked behind me. I spun, flashlight up. It was back in its place, facing the street, swaying gently. And in it sat the man again, head tilted toward me. That same dead smile stretched too far across his face. This time I didn't say a word. I bolted through the side door, jumped the porch steps, and ran full tilt across the street to my cruiser. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 2 tries to get the keys in the ignition. When I looked up, the porch was empty. The red light above the door flickered once, then went out. Leaving the house swallowed in shadow, I drove 3 blocks before pulling over to radio in. The signal was clear again, Dispatch calm as ever. They said they hadn't heard my earlier call at all. I gave them the address, but when another unit went by an hour later, the house at 216 Cloudcroft was dark and boarded up. According to the property records they pulled, it had been vacant for over 18 months. The next morning I checked my cruiser. The dash cam was gone. The bolts weren't just loose, they were missing. Clean holes where the hardware had been. There was no footage from the night before. A week later, Ramirez came back to work. He asked me about the call I'd logged on Cloudcroft. Said he'd grown up around there, and he told me something I wish I'd never heard back in the late 80s. A man who lived at 216 was arrested for keeping people in his basement. Runaways. Anyone who wouldn't be missed. He'd sit on his porch, under a red light, waiting. Neighbors thought it was a no solicitations thing, but cops later found out it was a signal to his accomplice inside that someone was coming down the street. That accomplice was never caught. Went back to Cloudcroft once after that, just to see it in daylight. The house was still boarded, the grass dead in the yard. But as I stood there, staring, I noticed something on the porch. The rocking chair, and sitting in it, as plain as day, was my own body cam mine, not a cruiser cam dangling from one armrest. By the strap, it's still there. I'm not going back for it, because when I looked up at the door, the chain was back, padlocked from the outside, and the red porch light was on. It was a little past 2 in the morning when the call came through the radio. It's a kind of hour where the city feels hollowed out, and even Fort Worth's late-night stragglers are tucked away in bars or drive-thrus. I'd been parked in a quiet lot near Seminary Drive, halfway through a stale cup of gas station coffee, when dispatch's voice crackled over the static. Unit 12, respond to a possible domestic disturbance, 314 Holloway Avenue. Caller reports screaming inside the old Trinity Baptist Church building. No one should be on site. Property's been shuttered for 2 years. Cross with Tolar Street. I keyed the mic, feeling that small, cold twist in my stomach I'd learned to recognize after 6 years on the job. Copy en route, I said, watching my own reflection in the patrol car's rear view as I flipped on the lights and rolled out. The streets toward Holloway were mostly dark, the occasional street lamp flickering over empty sidewalks. It's the area. Used to be busier back when the church was still open Sunday mornings. The lot would overflow. And I remembered directing traffic for their Easter service once. That was before the congregation dissolved, before rumors started about the pastor being involved in something ugly, before the building sat boarded and locked, its lot turning to cracked asphalt sprouting weeds. When I turned onto Tolar, I killed. The siren, just letting the red and blues strobe silently as I approached. The church sat in the middle of the block like a dead tooth in a row of worn houses, steeple still sharp against the night sky, but the windows were all dark. Even from the street, I could see the plywood over the front entrance, graffiti scrawled across it in black spray paint. I pulled into the lot slowly, crunching over loose gravel, the beam of my spotlight catching the faded white lines of parking spaces, and then I heard it faint, but clear enough to push adrenaline through me like ice water. A woman's voice, shrill and panicked, cutting through the night air. I couldn't make out the words at first, just the cadence rising and falling, like an argument or a cry for help. I killed the spotlight, parked, and stepped out, my boots hitting the asphalt. My breath was visible in the cool air, and I could smell something faint, like wet wood and mildew. Fort Worth Police? I called out, my voice sharp in the stillness. Is anyone inside? The voice cut off mid-syllable. The sudden silence was almost louder than the scream. I scanned the front of the building. The plywood was still intact, no obvious points of entry, but the old side door near the fellowship hall was slightly ajar, the metal frame just wide enough to catch a glint of light from the street lamp. My hand went to the butt of my service pistol. I stepped closer, radioing in, Unit 12 on scene, possible forced entry. I can hear I stopped myself because I couldn't anymore. Not a single sound. Just the wind brushing against the weeds. The door swung inward with the faintest creak when I nudged it. The smell inside was worse stale air. Dust, maybe animal droppings. My flashlight beam cut across the fellowship hall, illuminating folding. Tables stacked against the wall, chairs piled high, and a bulletin board still littered with curling flyers for events from years ago. The beam caught on a child's crayon drawing pinned at an angle, a bright yellow sun over stick figures holding hands. The paper was brittle at the edges. I moved deeper in, boots crunching over debris, the narrow hallway leading toward the main sanctuary was lined with closed classroom doors, each with a tiny rectangular window. I passed one and froze. Through the glass, I swore I saw movement, a shadow shifting, pulling back just as my light swept over it. "Hello?" I called again, my voice lower now, more measured. "If you can hear me, make yourself known." "Here to help." No answer. The sanctuary doors were at the end of the hall, big double oak things with brass handles dulled by time. I pushed one open, the hinges letting out a long, high-pitched squeal that seemed too loud in the emptiness. My light swept across the room. Rows of pews stretched toward the altar, all covered in a fine layer of dust, except for the first 2 rows, where the wood gleamed faintly, as if recently touched. I stepped closer, my boots leaving clean impressions. In the dust, the beam of my flashlight danced over hymnals stacked neatly, and then I saw a faint shimmer rising from the pews. My breath caught. It wasn't just the dust shifting in the light. It was heat. You learn to recognize it in this Joptha. Wavering air above something warm, like off a hood that's been running. I reached out and pressed my palm to the wood. It was faintly warm to the touch, the kind of warmth that shouldn't be there in an unheated, abandoned building at 2 in the morning. That was when I heard the breath, not mine. It was slow and measured, coming from somewhere behind me, like someone trying not to be heard, but close enough that I could feel the displacement of air. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the sanctuary. Empty pews, shadows bending in the corners. The breath stopped. Something in myth, the part that had been through bad calls, part that knew when a situation was wrong in ways you couldn't. Right in, a report told me to get out, but my training told me to clear the building. So I moved forward, step by step, toward the altar. That was when I noticed the baptismal pool cover had been pulled back. The water inside was black in the flashlight's glare, perfectly still. But as I drew closer, the surface began to ripple, not like from a draft, but like something was moving beneath it. A sound bubbled up, faint at first, then louder, whispering. Layered voices. Overlapping, too many to pick out words coming from that black water. I felt the hair stand up on my arms. I took one step back, and the water broke. A hand paled, dripping, fingers too long shot up and gripped the edge. I stumbled back another step, gun raised, flashlight shaking slightly as I trained it on. The pool, but nothing else came out, just the water lapping against the sides. The hand was gone. I keyed the mic, but all I got was static, harsh and loud. Then, faint under it, a voice not dispatch. It's not anyone I knew saying my name. I backed toward the doors, my boots slipping slightly on the dusty floor. And that was when I realized every pew in the first 2 rows was now empty of hymnals. I hadn't touched them. They were stacked neatly when I walked in. Now they were all open, facing the same page. The Book of Job. I didn't wait to see more. I pushed through the doors, down the hallway, and out into the lot, lungs burning. The air outside felt thick, like the humidity before a storm. My car sat where I'd left it, the engine still idling. I was halfway there when I saw movement in the driver's seat. My flashlight beam caught the outline of a woman, head down, hair hanging forward, sitting in my car. My hand tightened on my weapon. "Step out of the vehicle," I shouted. Her head lifted slowly, and it was my face. Not just similar, identical. She smiled, then opened her mouth, and my own voice came out.
"You didn't knock."
The lights on my patrol car flickered once, then went dark. That was the last thing I remember before I woke up sitting in the first pew of the sanctuary, my hands resting on warm wood, the sound of soft breathing all around me. Only this time, I wasn't the one breathing. The night air in Amarillo has a dry taste in late September. The kind of taste that sticks to the back of your throat and makes You wish you'd brought a thermos of coffee instead of the watered-down gas station kind. The wind that night carried a faint smell of feed corn and stale dust, the sort of scent you only notice in old farming towns. My shift started at 11, and like every third shift before it, I figured it would be quiet enough to make me question why I was even out here. Dispatch called in about 15 minutes after I clocked in. Trespasser sighting at the old grain elevators on the east side of town. The ones they shuttered back in the late 90s after the Cope went bankrupt. It wasn't unusual. Elevators were a magnet for bored teenagers, the occasional drifter, and more often than you'd think. Urban explorers with YouTube cameras. Unit 4. We've got a caller saying there's a light moving in the south. Tower of the elevators, the dispatcher said over the radio. I keyed the mic. 10-4, any other units in the area? You're the closest? Of course I was. Those elevators were a good 20 minutes from the nearest open diner, and nobody liked getting called out there. Even before they closed, the place had a reputation. The drive took me past stretches of flat, empty land where the streetlights thinned out until there was nothing but the truck's high beams, carving out a cone of pale yellow in the darkness. The silhouette of the elevators came into view from nearly a mile away, 3 hulking towers rising above the rest of the town. It's black against the low sky, like some monolithic thing from before people learned how to be afraid. I parked by the rusted chain-link fence, half of it already pushed down where others had crawled through. The gate was wrapped in weathered "No trespassing," signs that had long since stopped meaning anything. As soon as I stepped out, the silence hit me. No traffic noise, no barking dogs, just the whisper of wind slipping through broken windows. High above, my flashlight beam caught swirling motes of dust, turning in the air like slow snow. I keyed my shoulder mic. Dispatch, I'm on site. Going in to clear the south tower? The south tower entrance was a yawning rectangle, the heavy sliding door jammed open years ago.
Outs.
Inside, the air was heavier, damp, and clinging, with a thick smell of mold and old grain. My boots crunched over scattered kernels that must have been sitting here for decades. Amarillo PD, if anyone's in here, you need to make yourself known, I called out. My voice bounced around the hollow chamber, returning and warped. Distant echoes that made it sound like someone else was answering from far away. The first floor was nothing but concrete and rusted machinery. My light played over grain hoppers, belts, and long-dead motors. The call had been about someone higher up, so I found the steel ladder bolted to the wall and started climbing. The thing about those grain elevators is they're vertical mazes. Each floor has a different layout of catwalks, bins, and chutes. And the only real ways up or down are the ladders or the old freight lifts, which haven't worked in decades. So when I reached the second floor and swept my light across the space, I expected to see the usual dust, machinery, maybe some graffiti. What I saw instead was movement. It was quick, but not quick enough to fool me. A figure darted across my beam at the far end of the floor thin, about my height, wearing something loose that shifted with the motion. I raised my voice. Police, stop right there. The figure didn't stop. But here's the thing that got my skin crawling. There was no sound. No scuff of shoes, no clank of metal. Just the sight of them disappearing behind a row of chutes. I moved fast, weaving between the machines. My light swung around the corner. Empty. There was nowhere for them to go except back toward me or up the next ladder. And I hadn't heard the ladder. I swept the whole floor twice before climbing to the third. My boots rang on the rungs, the sound unnaturally loud in the emptiness. When I pulled myself up, my light caught more movement this time in the far corner. Same figure, same size, slipping away just as the beam hit them. The hair on the back of my neck started prickling. Can't keep running, I called out. My voice came out flatter than I wanted. I moved faster now, but again nothing. The dust on the floor was thick enough to hold footprints, and I should have seen some. Didn't. I kept climbing. Fourth floor movement again, this time closer, but still no sound of footsteps. The dust in the air was thicker now, stirred up into swirling clouds that caught the beam of my flashlight in a way that almost looked alive. I started to notice something else too every time I reached a new floor. The air got heavier, like I was breathing in old paper and damp cloth. by the 6th floor. I wasn't even trying to call out anymore. I just wanted to see what the hell I was chasing. I made it to the 8th floor before I realized something was wrong. The tower had 9 floors in total, but the ladder to the 9th was gone cut clean, like someone had taken a torch to it years ago. I stood there, breathing hard, listening. The dust swirled around me, thick enough that I could taste it. That's when I heard the sound. It was faint, almost like a foot dragging across concrete, somewhere above me. I tilted my light up toward the gaping hole where the next floor should have been. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, someone leaning over the edge, watching me. I shouted, and my voice echoed back in strange, drawn-out syllables. When the figure pulled back, it did so in a way that made my stomach tighten, not stepping away, not ducking, but just sort of sliding out of sight. I called dispatch, told them I had a suspect and needed another unit. They said backup was 10 minutes out. 10 minutes in a place like this might as well be 10 hours. I kept my light on that opening, waiting to see movement again. But instead, the dust started falling, thin streams of it, drifting down from the 9th floor in perfect vertical lines. It was so quiet I could hear the individual particles landing. I backed toward the ladder, intending to put some distance between me and that opening. That's when I heard the metal behind me creak. I spun the light down the ladder well, and for a split second, I saw a hand gripping the rung just below the floor I'd come from. Pale, thin fingers, too long for the size of the palm, they pulled back before I could get a better look. I went down a floor, moving fast. Halfway across the 7th, I caught sight of the figure again, standing at the far end near a shattered window. This time, they didn't move when my light hit them. They just stood there, head tilted. I took a step forward, and in that instant, every grain of dust in the beam of my flashlight seemed to shift, almost like the air itself was bending toward them. I realized then that the loose clothing I'd seen before wasn't clothing at all, it was the dust. Clinging to the shape of a body that wasn't fully there, the figure took one step toward me. I froze. There was no sound, but the dust around me began to swirl harder, getting into my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I coughed, staggered back, and in that moment of blinking tears, the figure vanished again. I don't remember making the decision to run, but I was halfway down the 2nd ladder before I realized I'd moved. My boots slammed on metal rungs, my light swinging wildly. Somewhere above, I could hear the faint ringing of the ladder. It's like someone else was climbing down behind me, but every time I stopped to listen, the sound stopped too. I made it to the 1st floor and stepped out into the night air, gulping it down like water. Backup rolled in 2 minutes later. Cleared the building together, no one inside. We found no footprints in the dust, no sign of anyone. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. When I got back to my truck, there was dust on the passenger seat, not scattered. Just one perfect pale handprint, fingers too long, pressed into the fabric. I haven't been back to the elevator since, and sometimes, when the wind's just right in Amarillo, I swear I can taste that same stale dust in the air, even miles away. The storm came in hard from the Gulf, the kind that feels like it's been crouched out over the water for days, just waiting to hit land. You could smell the salt long before you saw the rain, that sharp metallic temps in the back of your throat. The air heavy and wet, like it was trying to drown you before the first drop even fell. Bayou Vista doesn't get much news coverage unless it's hurricane season, and this wasn't even a hurricane, just a tropical disturbance, the kind they don't bother to name. But it still pushed the tide up over the bulkheads and into the streets, turning the little canals between the houses into something wider, darker. I was on the overnight shift with the county's volunteer water rescue unit. My name's Ray Thomas, and I've lived here my whole life. I've seen storms you could smell from Louisiana. I've pulled old-timers off rooftops during Harvey. And I've been waist-deep in water that was more snake than river. But this was different. It came in at 3:42 a.m., the dispatcher's voice faint under the static. Possible submerged vehicle, Bayou Vista. Caller reports seeing headlights in the water near Neptune and Sailfish. No driver visible. Your closest, Ray? I grabbed the rescue skiff from the dock behind the station, the kind with the flat bottom and the dull red paint that's been sun-bleached to almost pink. The rain was steady but not pounding, like it was trying to lull you into thinking things weren't that bad. But the wind had a bite to it, shoving the boat sideways as I eased down what used to be the street. Porch lights glowed under the low clouds, little islands of yellow in the gray. And every so often I'd see something drift past. A cooler, a child's plastic chair, a half-empty gas can. Things that made you wonder where they'd floated. From the sedan came into view just past the intersection, maybe 40 yards ahead, half-turned in the current. At first glance, it looked like it had been parked there before the water rose, the way folks sometimes underestimate the tide. But as I got closer, I saw the back end was floating. The front bumper dipped down into the black water. The headlights were dead, but there was a faint glow from inside, like someone's phone screen lighting up in the dark. The windows were all fogged from the inside. Not just misted fog so thick it was like the glass had been painted white. And smeared across the back windshield were streaks, wide and frantic, kind you'd make with the palm of your hand when you're desperate to see out. But at the very center, dragging from one side to the other, were parallel lines, 4 of them like fingernail marks in the condensation. I killed the outboard and let the skiff drift up alongside. "Hello?" I shouted, the words sounding too small in the wet dark. No answer. I tapped the glass with the butt of my flashlight. The fog on the inside trembled, as if something had shifted just beyond it. The driver's side door was barely above the waterline. I tried the handle, but it was locked, so I leaned back, ready to break it with my rescue tool. That's when I saw it just for a second, the shape of a face in the driver's seat. Not looking at me, looking straight ahead like they didn't even hear me. The skin was pale in the beam of my light, and the mouth hung slightly open. I banged again, harder, but the head didn't turn. I smashed the window. The safety glass spider-webbed, but didn't give. So I hit it again until it burst inward, water slapping against my chest as it poured into the cabin. That's when the smell hit something stale, sour, but not rot exactly, like damp clothes, sealed in a bag for too long. I shoved my arm through, unlatched the door, and pulled it open. The seat was empty. The interior light was on. The glow I'd seen from the canal and the driver's seat belt was still buckled. The fabric was dry where the fog hadn't touched it. It's a kind of dry that didn't make sense when the whole car was sitting in 3 feet of water. I leaned in, sweeping my flashlight across the dash. The radio was on static, low but steady. In the cup holder was a phone, screen cracked, still playing a voicemail. The voice was faint, female with a strained edge to it. "Ray, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would follow me here. Please." The message ended in a wet, choking sound, then silence. My stomach tightened. Nobody should have known I'd be the one answering this call. I pulled back fast, scanning the water. The houses here were dark, shutters clattering in the wind. You'd think if someone was screaming into a phone from a sinking car, a neighbor would have heard. But there was nothing, just the slap of water against siding. I hooked the sedan to the skiff's tow line, figuring we'd haul it back to the launch for the sheriff's guys to look at. But as soon as I tried to move, the skiff jerked hard, the line going taut. It felt like the car had snagged something below. I grabbed my pole light and leaned over the edge. The beam cut down into the water, murky with silt. Shapes swam in and out of the light, bits of trash, weeds, a dead fish. And then farther down, I saw fingers. Just fingers, pale and limp, curling over the edge of the sedan's rear bumper from underneath. My chest went cold. I yanked the light back and started cutting the tow line. But before I could finish, the skiff lurched again, harder. The water between me and the car began to ripple, small at first, then faster, like something was circling just below the surface. I gunned the outboard. It sputtered, coughing like it had swallowed water. The ripples closed in, and I swear I saw a shadow rise in them, not a shape you could name, just darker than the dark around it. And moving toward me, the sedan's fogged windows trembled. the fingernail marks streaking fresh through the condensation from the inside. That's when I heard the voice again. Not from the phone this time, from inside the car. Whisper dragging over the water like smoke. "Ray, open the door." I didn't stay to look. I cut the rope, shoved the throttle forward until the outboard screamed, and shot down the canal, toward the bay. The rain blurred everything, the houses, the street signs, the sky itself, till all I had was the roar of the motor and the pounding in my head. When I got back to the launch, the deputy on duty asked where the car was. I told him it had gone under before I could reach it. He looked past me at the empty tow line, then back at my face. Like he didn't believe me but didn't want to say so. They sent a dive team the next morning when the water started to drop. No car, no debris, not even tire marks in the mud, where it would have sat. But a mile away, near the edge of the bay, someone found a rear windshield. It was unbroken, slick with condensation on the inside, and when they wiped it clean, there were 4 long fingernail marks trailing from one side to the other. I still work rescue, but I don't take calls to Bayou Vista after dark anymore. And sometimes, late on a rain-heavy night, my phone rings from an unknown number. I never answer. But once, just once, I picked up. And there was nothing on the line except the sound of water filling a car and a woman's voice whispering my name. The rain had started before dawn, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the asphalt of Highway 30 into a slick black ribbon stretching through the pine forests east of Huntsville. It was the kind of wet that clung to you, seeping into your collar and cuffs. And Sergeant David Harlan had been on enough prisoner transports to know that damp weather made everyone meaner. The inmates got restless, the guards got irritable, and the road itself felt longer. He sat in the passenger seat of the white Department of Corrections transport van. Coffee cooling in the cup holder, eyes on the dark smear of road illuminated. By the high beams, behind him, 6 men sat in the caged rear compartment, wrists and ankles shackled, belly chains linking them together like beads on a chain. They were headed from the Walls unit in Huntsville to a transfer facility down in Livingston. It was a short run compared to the cross-state hauls he'd done before, but the morning was already heavy with that crawling tension he'd learned to respect. The driver, a younger officer named Keene, was quiet except for an occasional grunt. When the windshield wipers skipped over a dry spot, David liked it that way. Too much chatter in a transport meant someone was trying to distract themselves from a problem. And in his experience, problems in prisoner transport tended to involve bolt cutters or blood. He'd already done the chain count twice that morning. Before they left the unit, 6 prisoners, 6 chains, all the locks secure. So you could see their heads in the rearview mirror, some staring out the barred windows, some looking down at their feet. The quiet ones, always the ones to watch. They were. Halfway to Livingston, when the van jerked hard to the right, Keene swore and wrestled the steering wheel, easing them onto the gravel shoulder. "Flat," he muttered, killing the engine. The rain hissed against the roof, louder now without the rumble of the motor. David checked his watch just after 6. No cell service out here in the low stretch between hills. The nearest mile marker was a quarter-mile back, and traffic was sparse at this hour. He unbuckled his seatbelt and glanced toward the back. The inmates were watching. Always watching. A few smirks, a few blank stares. He'd worked enough years to know they could smell. Opportunity, he told himself, it didn't matter. The back doors were locked from the outside. The divider was steel. Even if someone slipped a cuff, they weren't getting past him. He stepped out into the rain, boots sinking slightly into the muddy shoulder, and joined Keene at the rear wheel. The right rear tire was shredded, bits of rubber fanned out on the gravel. "Spares under the rack," David said. Keene nodded and crouched to retrieve the jack. That was when David heard it faint, almost lost under the rain. His name. Not his last name. His first David. He straightened and glanced at Keene, but the younger man was busy with the jack handle. The voice hadn't come from him anyway. Had come from behind him. From inside the van, he turned slowly toward the rear doors. The small, reinforced windows were streaked with rain, blurring the faces behind them. The inmates were still in their seats, Owen's lips were moving, told himself he was imagining it, that the hiss of rain had tricked his ears. But the hair at the base of his neck was standing up. He climbed back into the passenger seat to radio the unit, but the static was thick, each call swallowed by the white noise of bad weather and bad luck. Behind him, something shifted, a creak of metal, the faint clink of chain. He looked back through the mesh. 6 inmates. 6 chains. He counted twice. No one had moved more than a few inches. Then it came again, closer, more distinct. David. This time, it was barely above a whisper, but it was inside the van, not outside. He'd heard men call his name before, usually with some insult tacked on, but this was different. There was no edge, no sneer. It was almost pleading. He opened the passenger door, stepped back into the rain, and walked to the rear doors. The standard procedure was to check the locks any time something didn't feel right. He slipped his keyring from his belt, scanning the inmates through the window. None of them were speaking, though one a tall, rail-thin man named Briggs was, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Everything all right back there?" David asked, his voice even. Briggs shook his head slowly, just once. "You need to leave us locked," he said, voice muffled through the steel. "Don't open it. Not yet." David's skin prickled. "Why?" Briggs's gaze flicked to his. Left, toward the far end of the bench seat. And then back to David. "Because you brought more than 6, he said. David stared at him, the rain now a steady sheet soaking into his uniform. "What the hell are you talking about?" But Briggs just looked away, pressing his cuffed hands tight against his stomach like a man holding in a shiver. Keene called out that the tire was almost changed. David gave the chain count one more time, 6, and forced himself to walk back. To the front, climbed into the cab, dripping on the floor mat, and tried to shake off the unease. He was halfway to convincing himself when he heard it again. This time, it came from right behind his seat, the voice low and rough, like breath through dry leaves. "David, open the door." He twisted around so fast his neck popped. The nearest inmate, a stocky man named Mendez, was staring at the floor. The others were still as stone, not one mouth had moved. But he could see it now, 7 sets of eyes. His brain rejected the math, insisted on 6, but his gut told him otherwise. When he's sitting low in the shadows at the far corner, their face hidden, too low for the chain to hang naturally, Keene slammed the back hatch of the van, calling over that they were ready to roll. David didn't move, his eyes locked on that shadowed figure, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw its head tilt upward, as if acknowledging him. There was no face, just darkness, deeper than the dim of the van interior, like the outline of a man-shaped hole in the world. When Keene climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, David forced his gaze away, telling himself he'd imagined it. They pulled back onto the highway, tires humming on the wet pavement. But as the van gained speed, he heard the chains behind him shift in a way they shouldn't, as if something unshackled was moving among them. The ride to Livingston felt longer than it should have. Keene kept up a low murmur about football scores and weather reports, but David barely heard him. Every so often he caught Briggs glancing up into the mirror, eyes sharp with that same fear from before. And once, just once, David felt a hand brush the back of his seat, cold, wet, far too high to be coming from a man. Chained to the bench, when they finally rolled through the Sally Port at the transfer facility, David ordered the rear doors opened for the official chain count. 6 men stepped down onto the wet concrete, shackles clinking. 6. He stood there with his clipboard ticking off names, refusing to look into the empty van, because in the last few seconds before the doors shut, he'd heard a voice, low and close, right at his ear. "See you on the road again." David, and for the first time in his career, he didn't write his own signature on the transfer sheet. His hand wouldn't stop shaking. It was just after 9 on a Thursday night when the call came in. Laredo was still hot, even this late in September, the kind of heat that clung to your skin like a damp towel. I was halfway through my coffee at the dispatch center when the red light lit up on line 2. the one we reserved for 911 calls. The thing about nights like that is you expect the usual domestic disputes, noise complaints, maybe a drunk driver. Not this. 911. What's your emergency? I said, the same way I'd said it 1,000 times. There was no answer. Not silence exactly, more like an open mic in a quiet room. I could hear something faint in the background, a low hum, the kind you get when you're standing next to a refrigerator or an air conditioner, and breathing. Slow, steady breathing, close to the mic. Hello, this is Laredo Emergency Services. Do you need police, fire, or medical? Just that same quiet hiss and the sound of someone exhaling. We get hang-ups all the time. Usually they're accident skids playing with phones or someone pocket dialing. Sometimes it's more serious, but if the caller stays on the line without, speaking protocol says we keep them there while we triangulate. The tech next to me, Lupe, was already on it, eyes flicking between screens. After a minute, I tried again. If you can't speak, press any number on your phone. No tones, just breathing. The call traced to an address on the north side. Sagging 2-story house off San Bernardo Avenue. The property came up in the system flagged known drug activity. Prior calls for weapons violations, possible ties to a local crew. The last report from that address had been 3 months ago. Suspected overdose. I patched through to the sergeant on duty, Torres, and gave him the rundown. We got an open line. Probable disturbance, I told him. Caller's not talking. But the line's hot. Locations 2417 San Bernardo. Torres grunted. That place again. All right, we're going in. Keep the line open. If they say anything, you let me know in real time. They rolled out with an entry team. 5 guys in. Full gear, rifles up, vests snug. I could hear them over the tactical channel, voices clipped and controlled. I kept one ear on the open 911 line. The other on their comes. Here's where it got strange. The breathing on the 911 line shifted when Torres's team reached the front porch. It grew just slightly louder, like whoever was on the other end had leaned toward their mic, and it matched the cadence of Torres's breathing perfectly. I know that sounds weird, but when you monitor calls for years, you get to know the sound of people's breathing the same way you know voices. This was identical, same pace, same depth, like it was being mirrored. Stack up. Torres ordered over the radio, and in my ear, over the 911 line, I heard the exact same words, same tone, same inflection. Only Torres wasn't patched too? The call? There's no way his voice should have been coming through. They breached. I heard the crash of the door and the shouts of police. Get down, over the tactical channel. And then, impossibly, the exact same crash and shouts came through the 911 line, not an echo. Not a lag, but perfectly synchronized. The house was a mess of overturned furniture, roaches scattering in the light. Stale beer smell mixed with something sharper, metallic. I heard boots moving through hallways, the creak of floorboards, and on the 911 line I heard it too. Same boots. Creaks. Like there was another team, in another identical house, doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Torres called in. Right. Dispatch. We got 3 in custody, all in the front room. No sign of distress, but we're sweeping the rest, said. Copy, but didn't tell him what I was hearing. Then it happened on the 911 line. Among the mirrored noises, I heard a faint voice. A whisper. So low, I had to press my headset tight to catch it. They're not the same. The words sent a chill straight down my spine. I typed it into the log for record, then asked over the open line, who's not the same? Nothing. Just. Breathing upstairs, Torres's team found a locked door at the end of the hall. They called for a pry bar. Metal groaned as it gave way. On my end, I heard the same groan over the 911 line, and linely it was followed by something else. Something that didn't come over the tactical channel. A wet, dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Clear, Torres said over the radio. It's a bedroom. Empty. But in my ear, on the 911 line, I heard a voice say, "Help me." It was the kind of plea you can't craw, shaking, desperate. I nearly broke protocol and told Torres right then. But something in the tone made me hesitate. It sounded wrong. It's like someone trying to remember how to sound human. The sweep finished with nothing unusual found. 3 suspects detained. No. Weapons beyond a few knives. No sign of whoever called. Torres called it in as cleared, but the 911 line stayed open, even as I listened to the team leaving. I heard the mirrored version of them doing the same. Only this time, the breathing wasn't in sync. It was just behind half a second slower, like whoever was on the other end had stopped trying to match them. And then this is the part that's burned into my head one by one. I heard the footsteps on the 911 line stop until there was only one set left. Slow, deliberate, walking toward what I imagined was the phone. The breathing got louder, and then, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, it said, "I'm still in here." The line clicked dead. I sat there, staring at my monitor, pulse hammering in my ears. Lupe leaned over, eyes wide. "That call came in an hour before the raid," she said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned her screen toward me. The timestamp on the 911 log showed the call had been live for 83 minutes, which meant whoever had been on the other end started listening, mirroring, long before Torres even left the station. I didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, another open line call came in. Different house, different block. I answered, and heard breathing, slow, steady, and my own voice saying, "We're going to see each other soon." If you want, I can continue and tell you exactly how the second call went, because it didn't just end with breathing, it ended with me seeing something I can't explain, right here in the dispatch room. That's when I realized this thing wasn't calling from inside the houses. It was calling from somewhere that could follow anyone, anywhere, and mimic them perfectly until it decided not to. When I first got into the salvage business, the worst thing I'd ever run into in an abandoned building would be rats, black mold, or the occasional desperate squatter. Back then, I was a contractor's apprentice, doing side jobs pulling. Wiring, copper, aluminum, or whatever could be sold for scrap. This was before Houston started cracking down harder on metal theft. You'd get paid under the table and hope you didn't get tetanus or fall through a rotted floor, but that was years ago. I'd gotten better at it, more careful, only taking legal contracts from property owners, or so I told myself. The job at the old Northline Community Hospital came in through a friend of a friend. The place had been shut down for a decade, ever since Memorial Hermann built that shiny new medical complex across I-45. From what I'd heard, Northline's ER had been the kind of place ambulances used as a last resort. Too many incidents, botched surgeries, lost patients, underfunding, crime spilling in from the neighborhood. Then Hurricane Ike came through, tore part of the roof open, and the city closed it down for good. But there were still metals in the bones of that building, copper lines, elevator motors, even old hospital bed frames. The property manager said I could take whatever I could haul out as long as I didn't touch the boiler system or anything structural. He also said stay away from the ER wing after dark. I thought it was just an insurance liability thing. The ER was at the far east end of the hospital, connected by a long, narrow corridor that smelled like mildew even from the main lobby. My buddy Luis, who came with me, laughed it off when I told him what the guy had said. Stay away from the, after dark? What? Ghosts in there? He said, hoisting his Milwaukee drill into his backpack. Probably asbestos or rats, I said, though the way the property manager had looked at me flat. Like a warning stuck in my head, we started in the old ICU on the 3rd floor. The air was thick with that dry, burnt dust smell you get when a place hasn't been ventilated in years. Ceiling tiles sagged like wet cardboard. We worked for hours, stripping copper from the walls and conduit, filling 2 rolling carts until they were almost too heavy to push. Every so often, we'd hear one of the old elevators ding somewhere down the hall. That sound got under my skin. If you've worked in enough abandoned buildings, you know the noises, pigeons in the ducts, pipes settling, metal creaking when the wind hits right. But this was different. The elevators weren't powered. not in any way that should have made them move. Yet every hour or so, we'd hear that soft, polite chime, followed by the sliding groan of doors opening. Luis kept saying. It was probably connected to the emergency power grid still active for the main building. That maybe a breaker hadn't been flipped in 10 years. But the lights in the hall never came on when the ding sounded. It's just the sound itself, floating through the dim hallways, as if the building were remembering how to work. Around dusk, Luis suggested hitting the ER for a few minutes, quick in and out. I saw the breaker panels down there, but they've got copper bus bars the size of my arm. I hesitated. I don't know why it wasn't like I was scared of a bunch of old gurneys, but something about the way the corridors leading that way seemed darker, as if the windows down there let in less light, made my stomach feel tight. Still, the thought of leaving easy money on the table didn't sit right either. The ER entrance was different from the rest of the hospital. The tiles were a different color, yellowed underfoot. The walls were scuffed with old crash marks from stretchers. The overhead fluorescent fixtures were all missing their covers, the tubes hanging exposed like broken bones. As we rolled our carts in, the temperature seemed to drop. Not freezing, just a few degrees cooler than the rest of the place. I told myself it was because of the way the ER sat lower than the rest of the hospital, closer to the old ambulance bay where the air could move. But then I noticed the smell. It wasn't mold, not exactly. More like a faint sweetness under something rotten. Like flowers that had been left too long in a vase, mixed with the coppery temps of dried blood. Luis didn't seem to notice.
It was
Already at a side panel, prying off the metal cover with his drill, I wandered further in, past a row of empty triage rooms. Most of the beds were gone, but a few gurneys still sat in the corners. Their vinyl torn open and stuffing, spilling out like gray cotton. Here in one room, a patient monitor was still mounted. To the wall, its blank screen reflecting the beam of my flashlight. That's when I heard the first elevator ding. It was close, too close. I turned toward the main nurses' station at the center of the ER, and there it was, the service elevator. Its doors were open, yawning into a black shaft. The panel above it flickered with a green light showing B. Luis was still clanking around at the breaker panel, so I walked toward it, curious. The floor indicator began to change B. 1, 2. Climbing higher with each soft chime. The doors started to close. I don't know what made me step inside. Habit, maybe. Okay, an elevator's just a machine, and if it still had power, maybe I could check out the top floors for more scrap. The interior was small, just big enough for a stretcher and 2 EMTs to stand beside it. The floor was sticky under my boots. The smell inside was stronger, metallic, sour. The doors slid shut. The elevator jolted upward. No hum of motors, no sound of cables, just that weird hollow motion in my stomach like I was moving when maybe I wasn't. The panel above the door lit up 3, 4, 5, then kept going. I stepped back. There were only 6 floors in the building. I knew that. The cab was still moving. The light stayed on 10. For a moment before the doors slid open, it wasn't a floor I recognized. The hallway outside was too narrow, the walls. To clean, painted a pale mint green like they'd been scrubbed yesterday. No dust, no debris, no signs of abandonment. The overhead lights were on, buzzing faintly. Down the corridor, I thought I saw figures move in orderlies. Maybe, but they didn't walk right. Their steps were jerky, like film frames missing between movements. I should have stepped back, should have hit the door close button until my finger bled. Instead, I leaned forward to look. That's when one of them turned its head. Its face was wrong. It's too flat, too smooth, the mouth an inky slit that didn't move when it spoke. But I heard it anyway, like a whisper pressed right into my ear. Not your floor. The doors shut. The elevator dropped. My stomach lurched so hard I had to grab the handrail. The panel blinked through numbers too fast to read, then dinged. When the doors opened again, I was back in the ER. Luis, staring at me. "Where the hell do you go? You were gone like half an hour," he said. I told him the elevator took me to another floor. He laughed and said all the upper floors were gutted. But when I asked him if there was a 10th floor, he stopped smiling. There's never been a 10th floor here, man. We left right after that, hauled our carts out, locked the van, drove away without looking back. That night, I woke up to the sound of an elevator dinging in my apartment building. I live on the first floor. The elevator here stops at 3. But I could swear when I stepped into the hall to check. The display was lit up bright green. It read 10, and from far down a hallway that didn't exist, I thought I saw someone standing, still as a shadow, waiting. It was close to midnight when Trooper Russell called it in. I was already northbound on I-35, headed back toward Waco from Temple after a long shift, and his voice over the radio had that taut edge that made my foot press harder on the gas. He stopped a maroon Chevy Tahoe at mile marker 287 for suspected narcotics trafficking. He didn't sound spook. Truss was a steady hand, but there was something in the way he paused before adding, "K9's acting off, requesting another unit." I was 10 minutes out when I saw the blue strobes against the night sky. Was light, just a few semis rumbling past in the right lane. I pulled in behind his cruiser, my headlights sweeping across the Tahoe's dusty bumper. Russ was standing beside his K9 unit, a black Belgian Malinois named Duke. The driver, a wiry man in his 50s with a weathered face, was leaning against the SUV's hood. His hands rested lightly on the metal, fingers twitching. "Everything good?" I asked as I stepped out, keeping my tone casual. Russ gave a tight shake of his head. "Weird as hell," he said under his breath. Duke wasn't focused on the vehicle, which was strange enough. Usually when he was keyed up, it meant he'd caught a scent from the interior dope, residue, something worth noting. But tonight, Duke stood rigid at the edge of the grass median, hackles raised, ears locked forward. His gaze wasn't shifting or scanning, it was fixed. He was whining low, deep in his throat, the kind of sound dogs make when they're both scared and ready to bite. I followed his line of sight. The median was a tangle of tall Johnson grass swaying in the breeze from the passing semis. At first, it just looked like the unkempt strip you'd expect along the interstate. But then the wind pushed the grass aside just enough to reveal something. Sticking up about 3 feet high, a wooden cross. It wasn't bright or fresh, like something from a roadside memorial kit at Walmart. This was old, darkened by years of weather, splintering along the edges. The horizontal beam hung crooked, nailed on by someone who didn't care if it was straight, Russ muttered. "Been coming through here for years. I never noticed that damn thing before." The driver glanced back toward us, his eyes darting to the cross. Then away like he'd seen it before, and didn't want to acknowledge it. "Ain't mine," he said quickly. No one had asked him. Russ leaned in and said, "Duke started this the second we stepped out. Didn't even sniff the Tahoe yet." I walked toward the median, the roar of trucks rattling my bones as they passed. The grass swallowed my boots, dry stalks scraping my jeans. The cross was planted deep, the wood gray and soft with rot. At its base, half buried in the dirt, was something white. I crouched and brushed the soil away with my glove. A plastic bag, knotted tight. Inside was a bundle of what looked like small animal bones, wrapped in strips of stained cloth. The smell was faint, but sour. The way something smells when it's been wet and then dried in the sun over and over. Russ stayed by the shoulder, holding Duke's lead taut. "What the hell is that?" I stood up slowly, the back of my neck prickling. "Not evidence we're keeping in the cruiser," I said. "Call it in. We'll get crime scene out here." The driver's breathing picked up. He shifted from one foot to the other, the kind of nervous fidget you see when someone's deciding whether to bolt. "Stay put," I told him, and maybe my tone was sharper than I intended. He froze but kept glancing toward the median. Then Duke's whining changed. It was higher, almost a keen, and he backed up a step, tail tucked. I looked down at the cross again. There was movement in the grass behind it, not the wind it was too, deliberate, to steady, like something or someone was crawling through. The stalks bent in a smooth line coming toward me. I took a step back, my hand resting on my sidearm. "Hey," Russ called. "You see that?" Before I could answer, the line of bending grass stopped about 10 feet away. The highway noise seemed to fade, leaving only Duke's whine and the rustle of the grass swaying where the movement had been. Then I smelled it. Not the faint sour from the bag, but a heavier, wetter odor like soil that had been turned over. In the rain, mixed with the copper temps of blood, the grass parted just enough for me to see pale skin. Not a face, not entirely, more like the curve of a cheekbone and part of an eye, open and unblinking. The rest was obscured, like it was buried under the stalks, but looking right at me, I stumbled back to the pavement, keeping my eyes on that spot. Russ had drawn his weapon, his voice low. "What is it?"
Don't know.
I said, but I did. Deep down, I did, and I didn't want to name it. The driver suddenly shouted, "You leave it be." His voice cracked wild. "It ain't yours." We turned on him, but Duke lunged toward the median, barking now, frantic. The grass where I'd seen the skin moved again, but this time it pulled back, retreating toward the base of the cross. The wooden post shuddered as if something had pressed hard against it from the far side. "Get him in cuffs." 8. I told Russ, and moved toward the cross again. The bag of bones was gone. I didn't hear it being taken. I didn't hear anything. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The driver was fighting Russ, shouting nonsense about it being bound here and how we'd let it loose. When we finally had him restrained in the back of the cruiser, I turned back to the median. The cross was gone too, not broken or knocked over, gone. Just a patch of dirt with a dark, damp hole where it had been driven into the ground. We searched the area with flashlights until backup arrived. Nothing. No cross. No bones. No sign of anyone crawling through the grass. Duke didn't calm down until we were miles away. Even then he kept glancing back through the rear window like he expected to see something following. The driver refused to say anything else at the station. We ran his record priors for petty theft and 1 assault, but nothing connected to the Tahoe, which turned out clean. Eventually, higher-ups told us to release him. Russ and I didn't argue. 2 nights later, call came in from a couple heading north past mile marker 287. They reported seeing a wooden cross in the median. It's just where the grass parts in the wind. Said they slowed down because it caught their headlights. They swore they saw someone kneeling at the base of it. Said it looked like a dog, only when the figure stood up, it was far too tall for that. The night we hit the wrong address in Dallas, it wasn't raining or storming like in the movies. It was one of those still, sticky Texas nights where the air feels like wet fabric clinging to your skin. The humidity in Oak Cliff hangs low, heavy, enough to taste, carrying that faint tank of creosote from the old telephone poles. We'd been parked 2 streets over for almost an hour, waiting for the go word from the warrant officer. The raid packet was clear. Street-facing duplex, right side unit, sagging porch, paint chipping in sheets, door with 2 deadbolts and a steel kickplate. Intel said it was a fentanyl cook site. Blueprints matched the tax records. The address had been triple-checked. I was point man number 1 through the door. Behind me was Holt, a quiet guy from East Texas, who could breach a door faster than most people could open one with a key. We'd all run the dry mock twice earlier that week at the training house in Fort Worth, right down to the room angles. Every piece of furniture in that plan was placed where we'd expect it tonight. That's what made the whole thing worse. The van doors slid open without a sound and we moved like clockwork. The duplex sat in a patch of dead streetlights. Porch light was off, blinds drawn, no noise inside. Holt stacked behind me, shield man just over his shoulder. The rest of the team flowed in line down the short walkway. Breach call came through. Door popped on the first hit clean like it had been oiled. No splinters, no kickback. We went in fast, clearing left and right, muzzles tight, corners swept. The second my boots hit the living room carpet, something in my brain ticked wrong. The smell hit me first, stale air, like the windows had been shut for years, but not musty. More like a house staged for sale that no one had actually lived in. And the furniture, Christ, every single piece was exactly where it had been in our training mock-up. The brown sagging sofa. The particle board coffee table with a missing corner. The same cheap landscape painting crooked above the TV stand. Even the black scuff on the wall at knee height, same angle, same length, clear left, came Holt's voice in my ear, but his tone was clipped. I swept the kitchen. The fridge was the same model as in the photos. Same dent on the left door. Same magnetic calendar flipped to March. It was August. It should have been nothing, people forget calendars, but it wasn't just the month. Every single date had the same pen mark. The same one we'd seen in the reference photos from the packet. No suspects so far? No movement? We moved deeper. The hallway was narrow, painted the same beige I'd seen on the training floor. My light swept the first bedroom and my stomach went cold. Even the unmade bed, the way the sheets were twisted, was identical to the mock-up. Down to the placement of the black boot sitting alone in the corner. The comes popped. 1, 2, clear. Keyed back, clear, advancing. But my voice felt dry, like I'd swallowed a handful of cotton. The last room was supposed to be the bathroom, small, blind corner, just inside the frame. In training, that corner was cleared by the second man. Tonight, it was me. In, weapon up. The light cut into the tile, beige floor, white shower curtain, no suspect, no sound. Then I froze. The far wall wasn't supposed to have a mirror, as the raid packet photos showed a cabinet. But here, from floor to ceiling, was a single pane of glass, and it didn't just reflect me. Behind my reflection, the hallway was empty, but I knew Holt was standing there. In the glass, he was gone. I didn't say anything. I just backed out, slow. Holt's face was pale. "What the hell is this place?" he muttered. We regrouped in the living room. "Building's clear," someone reported. But there was no relief. In his voice, it was flat, mechanical. The warrant officer stepped in from outside, scanning the room like he expected to find the mistake written on the walls. "You sure we've got the right unit? Matches packet to the nail," Holt said. "But there's something..." Then we heard it. A muffled thud from the hallway. Not footsteps, more like a body leaning into the wall from the other side. Every head turned. Shields up. We stacked again, moved toward the sound. But when we reached the hallway, it was empty. That's when the layout changed. The bathroom door we'd just cleared was gone. In its place was another closed door. Old, painted over a dozen times, frame warped like it hadn't been opened in decades. I looked at Holt. His jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "This wasn't in any packet." "Breach it," the officer said. Holt put the ram to the door. First hit echoed like it traveled down a well. Second hit, and the frame splintered, door swinging inward. The air that spilled out was ice cold, wrong for a Texas summer. It carried a smell that made the hair on my arms rise like rust and stagnant. Water. The room inside was impossible. It was long, too long for the duplex's footprint. The floor was unfinished concrete, walls stripped down to studs. Bare bulbs hung from frayed cords, flickering weakly, and lining both walls were SWAT uniforms on mannequins, arranged in perfect stacks, each mannequin holding the same gear, same rifles, same patches with our names. I saw my own name stitched above a vest on the far right. I stepped closer, breath loud in my ears. The mannequins. Face wasn't plastic, it was skin. My skin. Every mole, every scar. And its eyes moved. Holt grabbed my shoulder. "We're done here," he hissed, dragging me back. But the rest of the team was frozen, staring at their own copies. The officer's voice cut through, sharp. "Fall back now." We pulled out fast, retreating through the living room and out onto the porch. But when I turned for one last look, the house behind us was dark. The door we'd breached was shut, porch boards unbroken, no lights inside. We loaded into the van. No one spoke for the whole ride back. Next morning, I asked Holt if he'd looked at the GPS logs from the raid. Didn't answer. Just slid his phone across the table. The coordinates were different. Not 2 streets over. Not even in Dallas. The pin dropped in the middle of an undeveloped tract. 40 miles south, no structures in sight. The official report called it a false address due to a clerical error. No further action taken. But that night, when I got home, I found a package on my porch. No return address. Inside was a tactical vest. Mine, the patch still read my name. When I touched it, it was warm. I could swear it was still breathing. The night I first heard the knock, The kind of knock you feel in your teeth before you hear it in your ears. I had been on the job for just under 4 years. Nacogdoches County isn't exactly known for excitement outside of the college parties, and the occasional meth bust out in the pines, but we get our share of strange calls. This one came in just after 2 in the morning. Radio crackling over the hum of my cruiser's AC. A trespass report. County water tower off Highway 21, just past Melrose. Dispatch said it was probably taggers. Neighbor across the pasture claimed he saw flashlights and movement up high about an hour ago. That wasn't unusual. Teenagers like to slap their little gang names or sports logos in bright colors on the side of the tanks. But what caught my attention was the second part of the report according to the neighbor. The fresh paint was already 40 feet up. That didn't make sense. Those ladders to the catwalk started about 10 feet off the ground, and you need a key for the lock bar. Unless you're carrying a heavy extension ladder in the dead of night, you're not getting up there. I pulled off 21 and took the gravel access road, my headlights bouncing over the ruts. The tower rose out of the dark like a giant's leg, pale gray in the moonlight, the tank glinting wet in patches where dew had gathered. The fence around it sagged in places, topped with a few half-hearted rows of rusted barbed wire. I killed the engine and listened. Cicadas hummed in the trees. A whip-poor will called from somewhere near the pasture fence. Far off a semis. Tires whispered down the highway. But there was something else, Knock. It was faint but clear. A hollow metallic tap, like someone knocking politely on a steel door. Knock, knock, 3 beats. Then silence. I got out, flashlight in hand. Boots crunching on gravel. The smell hit me first trust. Algae and something like cold. Wet iron. I walked up to the fence and swung the beam up, and there it was, fresh red paint. Letters no bigger than a football, dripping slightly in the cool night air. A lazy swirl. Maybe part of a tagger's name, but it was way up on the tank a good 40 feet. I scanned the ladder. The lock bar was in place, padlock dangling. The rungs gleamed faintly in my light. Dry. I keyed the fence and stepped inside. The grass was tall, brushing my legs damp with dew. I put my hand on the ladder's first rung and felt the cold metal under my glove. I tilted my light up again and saw the catwalk just visible in the moonlight. The knock came again, a little. Louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I don't know why, but my chest tightened. This wasn't the casual ping of cooling metal or the groan of wind through a pipe. It was deliberate. I unclipped the keys from my belt and unlocked the ladder. Bar. It swung aside with a squeal. I started climbing. The metal groaned under my boots, but the rungs stayed solid. I could feel the night air cool against my cheeks as I rose above the tree line. My flashlight threw shifting shadows over the riveted legs of the tower. The knocking kept up, always in threes, always with that hollow, hand-like quality. By the time I reached the catwalk, my breathing was loud in my ears. The air felt colder, sharper, like a front had blown through in the last 5 minutes. I stepped onto the graded walkway and looked out over the pines. Miles of dark forest under a pale wash of moon. The tank loomed beside me, curved steel stretching up another 20 feet. I walked slowly around the circumference, light tracing the rivets and bolts.
Ow!
When I reached the side facing the road, I found the fresh tag. It wasn't just a swirl. It was a face. A crude, cartoonish face in red, grinning wide, teeth square, and blocky. The eyes were just black circles with red drips running down like tears. That's when the knock came again. From the other side of the steel, directly in front of me. Knock, knock. I froze. I've dealt with drunks swinging crowbars, half-wild dogs, even one meth head swinging from a second-story balcony. None of that made my stomach drop like hearing that sound at arm's length. With 40,000 gallons of water between me and whoever or whatever was making it. I reached out and laid my palm on the tank. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been, as if the water inside had been sitting in an ice bath. I tapped it once with my knuckle. The echo rang back, deep and empty. Then something tapped back, matching my rhythm exactly. I swallowed. Hard, Sheriff's Department. Who's in there? My voice sounded small in the open night. Silence. I circled again, checking the hatch at the top of the tank. Locked, padlock intact, no sign of tampering. The wind picked up, a steady hiss. Through the pines. Then, faint but clear, the knock started again. Moving around the tank like it was following me. I don't know why I looked down, but I did. And that's when I saw it. Something was standing in the grass directly under the tower, not moving, just there. My flashlight beam shook as I tried to fix on it. At first I thought it was a person in a hoodie, but the proportions were wrong. Too thin in the limbs, too long in the arms, head cocked at an unnatural angle. The beam caught its face for a second, and I saw eyes shine like an animal, but higher. Up than any coyote or deer, it lifted one long arm and knocked once against the steel leg of the tower. The sound boomed up through the structure, deep and resonant. From inside the tank, something knocked back. My scalp prickled. I turned to the ladder, fighting the urge to just jump over the side and take my chances with the ground. As I climbed down, I kept glancing at the thing below. It didn't move. Away. Just watched, head tilted. When I was halfway down, the knocking from inside the tank grew louder, faster, until it was a steady pounding. Steel vibrated under my hands, almost humming. I dropped the last 10 feet and hit the ground. Hard. The thing was gone. I swept the light around just grass fence, the shadowed legs of the tower. My breathing was ragged, heart thudding. I locked the ladder bar, backed out of the fence, got in the cruiser. The knocking stopped the second I closed the door. Back at the station, I filed it as a trespass attempt. No suspect found. I didn't mention the figure or the knocking. That followed me around the tank. I told myself it was just fatigue, a trick of the dark, a raccoon or a stray dog. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, every night I've been on patrol near Melrose, I've heard it. Sometimes faint, like it's a mile off. Sometimes so loud I can feel it through the car seat. Always 3 knocks. Last night I drove out there again, alone, just to see if I'd imagined it all. The tower was quiet when I arrived, the air warm. And still, I parked on the access road and stepped out. No wind, no bugs, it's just silence. Then the knock came from inside my cruiser, 3 times. Hollow and cold, like a hand tapping from inside the trunk. I didn't open it. I drove straight home. And when I pulled into my driveway, I could swear I saw fresh red paint on my garage door. A crude grin, eyes dripping black, and tonight I hear it again, not outside this time. It's not in my car, from the other side of my bedroom wall. Knock, knock, knock. It was a Tuesday night in late September when the call came in. It's the kind of night in El Paso when the air is still thick with the day's heat even after midnight, and the desert wind carries a smell of dust and old asphalt. I was parked behind a closed Dollar General off Dyer Street, sipping the last of a lukewarm coffee that had been bad even when it was hot, listening to the dispatcher read out a string of noise complaints and domestic disturbances. Nothing out of the ordinary until her voice changed, just a little sharper, a little quieter. Unit 321, check the yard on Bowie Street, RP State's Prowler, same location as last 3 nights. The hair on the back of my neck went up before I even keyed the mic. Bowie Street wasn't my beat, but I knew the place. Single-story houses with bars on the windows, yards choked with tumbleweeds, or old cars up on cinder blocks. People kept their lights low and didn't answer the door unless they knew you. The Prowler calls had been passed around for a week, each officer taking a turn, each one reporting the same thing: shadow in the yard. Seen through the front window, then nothing when they got there. 321 copies. Show me en route. It took me 6 minutes to get there, passing the empty lot where the old Piggly Wiggly used to be. The one they said was haunted after a worker got crushed in the loading dock. I didn't believe that crap, but I'd also never been in there. Alone. The Prowler house was halfway down the block. White paint gone to gray. A chain-linked fence with a busted latch. Porch light burned weak and yellow over a bare concrete stoop. The reporting party was an old woman named Ortega. She opened the door before I even knocked. her thin face pale in the light from the living room. "He's out there again," she whispered, pointing toward the side yard. "Same window. He just stands there." I stepped inside and followed her to the back of the living room. The window she meant was curtained in thin lace, and beyond it I could see the yard under a sliver of moonlight. The grass was long and patchy, the kind that crunches under your boots because it's half dead. And there, just where she said was, a man. He wasn't moving, just standing with his back to us, shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted toward the house. The sight hit me with the same cold, slippery feeling I'd get watching a snake cross the road. "Stay here," I told her, then stepped out into the night. The air outside was warmer, and the cicadas were loud enough to feel in my teeth. I rounded the side of the house, my flashlight cutting through the dark. I'd been in enough yards to expect the guy to bolt. They always do. But the beam hit nothing but the wall, the window, and the dry grass. No, man. I swept the whole yard. Twice. Checked the fence line. Even pushed into the neighbor's yard. Nothing. When I got back inside, Mrs. Ortega was still by the window. "You didn't see him leave?" I asked. Her eyes were fixed on the glass. "He never leaves. Just stops being there." I didn't like the way she said it. I took her statement, told her to keep her doors locked, and cleared the call. But I couldn't stop thinking about the guy. The angle he'd been standing at. The way he'd faced the house like he was listening for something. The next night. I wasn't surprised when another unit got called there again. This time I decided to swing by, unofficial or not. I parked a block away, lights off, and came in on foot. I stayed low, cutting across the neighbor's yard until I had a clean view of the side window. And there he was again, same position, same tilt of the head. But something new this time. His arm was raised just enough for me to see his hand. He was holding something. Took me a second to recognize the shape. A small portable radio. I moved in quick, boots silent on the dead grass, and by the time I reached the spot, he was gone again. No footprints in the dirt, no rustle of someone running off, just the faint hiss of static. I found the radio in the grass, still on, tuned to the El Paso police dispatch frequency. I bagged it, figuring it was part of some creepy stalker's kit. But the crime lab didn't get anything off it. No prints, no DNA, nothing. 2 nights later, the call came again. This time, I was first on scene. The yard was empty, but inside the house, the window curtains were open, and on the coffee table was the radio I'd collected. Same model, same scuff marks on the casing, same channel tuned in, except this one was plugged into a little mechanical timer. The kind you use to turn your lights on when you're on vacation. Mrs. Ortega swore she didn't put it there, said Mrs. She'd locked her door after the last time I was there and hadn't unlocked it since. That's when I noticed something else. The voice coming from the scanner was dispatch reading out a call. A prowler on Bowie Street. The location? Ortega's house. The timestamp on the call was 2 minutes in the future. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe the scanner was replaying an old recording. But then my radio crackled, and dispatch gave me the exact same call, word for it. Right on cue. I didn't like being in that house anymore. The air felt heavier, and the low murmur of the scanner seemed to pulse in the walls. I asked Ortega if she had any family nearby she could stay with. She said she didn't. Said the house was her mother's, and she'd lived there her whole life. Her mother had been a dispatcher back in the 70s. Kept a scanner in every room to keep track of what was coming. That night, I sat in my unit 2 streets over, watching the house. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement in the yard. Not the figure this time, but the curtains in the back room moving like someone had brushed past them. I keyed my mic to let dispatch know I was checking it out. No response. I tried again. Nothing, just dead air. When I stepped into the yard, the noise of the cicadas was gone. It's completely gone. The silence was thick, pressing in on my ears. The grass didn't crunch under my boots anymore, just gave way, soft and damp, like I was walking on moss. I reached the window and looked inside. The room was empty, except for a folding chair in the middle of the floor and the scanner on the seat. The little green power light was on, but it wasn't plugged in. The timer was missing. The scanner crackled. My own voice came out. 3:21. Check the yard on Bowie Street. Then again, louder. Then again, louder still until it was deafening. I don't remember going inside, but somehow I was standing in that empty room, the scanner on the chair in front of me. The green light blinked, and then it was off. When I came to, I was outside. Leaning against the side of my unit, dawn just starting to gray the sky. My radio was back to normal. Dispatch calling out a traffic stop on the west side. My report from that night was short to shortened. I've never been able to fill it in. They stopped sending anyone to Bowie Street after Mrs. Ortega was found gone a week later. Her front door was locked, her car still in the driveway, the curtains drawn. The only thing in that side room was the scanner. Plugged into a timer set to 2:14 a.m. Every so often, a prowler call from that street still comes across the radio. But it's always 30 seconds before dispatch says it. And if you answer it, there's no one there except maybe, if you look through the window, a shadow with its head tilted, listening. I'd been on the night shift with Austin PD for 11 years when the call came in. It was one of those humid Central Texas nights where the air feels like warm syrup, thick and heavy against your skin. My cruiser's AC was struggling, and the radio chatter was quiet until dispatch broke in, voice crisp over the static. Unit 314. We've got a 211 in progress. Possible armed suspect fleeing northbound on Quail Ridge toward Briarstone. I was already 3 blocks away. I hit. The lights and siren, the blue strobes, cutting across dark lawns as I accelerated through the neighborhood. The roads out there narrowed quickly, winding through subdivisions built back in the 70s. The kind where cul-de-sacs hid behind long rows of oak trees. The suspect's car came into view 2 turns later, a silver Camry. Rear bumper dented. One tail light out. He blew through a stop sign, and I caught a flash of his head in the side mirror. Male, maybe late 20s. White hoodie pulled tight. 314 in pursuit. I called in, tightening my grip on the wheel. He wasn't driving, like someone who knew where he was going. He was darting left, right, doubling back on streets that looped in circles. My gut told me he didn't know the neighborhood, or maybe he was trying to lose me by taking roads, he thought. Weren't on my map, but Quail Ridge ends in a cul-de-sac. Knew it before he did. He made the fatal mistake 2 minutes later. Cutting a hard left down Kestrel Drive, I smiled. It was a dead end. The cul-de-sac had no outlet, just a ring of houses with long driveways and motion lights that came on like stadium lamps when you passed. I slowed a little, giving him the illusion of hope, and then turned in after him. His brake lights flared. He swerved hard into the circle, fishtailing on the asphalt before coming to a jarring stop against the curb. I stopped my cruiser 30 feet back, engine idling, hand on my holster, but he was gone. The driver's seat was empty. The Camry's doors were shut, keys still in the ignition, engine humming. The street was quiet except for the faint buzz of porch lights and the cicadas in the trees. 314 to dispatch, said slowly, scanning the shadows between the houses. Vehicle stopped, but driver is not here, requesting backup. As I waited, I glanced at my dashcam monitor. The feed was rolling, a live display of the chase I'd just finished. Only something was wrong. The screen showed the Camry still moving in the video. It was about 50 feet ahead of me, turning into the cul-de-sac. On the monitor, it hadn't hit the curb yet, but in front of me, in real life, it was already sitting there empty. I frowned, leaning closer. The delay wasn't just a second or two. It was, I don't know, it's maybe 7 seconds behind reality. I tapped the side of the unit thinking it was a buffer issue. Heat messes with electronics sometimes. But as I watched my live feed, showed the Camry hitting the curb in slow, stuttering frames in reality. The car had been sitting still for nearly a minute. Then I saw him, on the dashcam feed. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, same white hoodie, who'd still drawn up. He looked right toward my cruiser, head tilted as if he could see me watching him. My pulse ticked up. I looked through my real windshield. The Camry's door was still shut in the video. The man walked toward me, his hands hidden in the hoodie. Pocket. I shifted my gaze from the monitor to the actual street, scanning for movement. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a sound. But on the dash cam, stopped halfway just at the edge of the light from my headlights. His face was still hidden. Then, very slowly, he pulled one hand from his pocket and lifted it to his head, looking the hood back. I wish I could tell you I saw a normal face. I didn't. It wasn't wrong in a Hollywood monster way. It was wrong in a way my brain didn't want to name. The features were human, but they were placed just slightly out of where they should have been. Eyes a hair too far apart, mouth stretching just a little too wide. Not enough to scream inhuman, but enough to make every instinct in me scream to get out of there in real life. Nothing stood in the street. On the feed, he started to smile. Then the video glitched. A white flash, like static burn. And suddenly the delay closed. The feed was live again, showing the empty cul-de-sac exactly as I saw it. Backup arrived 2 minutes later. We cleared the area, house by house, yard by yard. No one saw a man in a white hoodie. No one heard anything. But here's where it gets worse. Later, back at the station, I pulled the dashcam footage to log the pursuit. I scrubbed through the chase. Nothing unusual until the cul-de-sac. And then, nothing at all. The video ended. The moment I turned on to Kestrel Drive, the last frame before it cut to black was my headlights hitting the back of the Camry. No man. No 7-second delay. It's no glitch. Just me arriving at an empty car that should have still been in motion. I never reported that part. You don't tell stories like that if you want to keep your badge. But 2 weeks later, another unit took a call. In the same area, same street, same dead dash end. And when I asked them later how it went, they said something I can't stop thinking about. They said their dashcam feed glitched too, just for a few seconds, long enough to show someone walking toward them who wasn't really there. And the description matched mine exactly. The call came in just before 3 in the morning, the time of night when the Texas highways stretch out like black rivers, and the only things moving are freight haulers, coyotes, and ghosts. I was working patrol east of Abilene, running a slow loop along I-20, when dispatch patched me through to a welfare check at Rest Stop 14, eastbound side. A passerby had reported a big rig parked awkwardly across 2 slots, engine running, headlights cutting through the mist, but no sign of movement inside except for what they thought was a driver slumped over the wheel. I'd been on enough of these to expect one of 3 things: a drunk driver who'd pulled over before killing himself or someone else, a trucker dead from a heart attack mid-haul, or more often lately some poor soul sleeping off a Red Bull and no-hawes binge. 8. I didn't expect was what I found. The rest stop was lit by those orange sodium vapor lamps that make the world look jaundiced. The fog that night was low and heavy, pooling in the dips and stretching across the asphalt in thin sheets. The lot was nearly empty, except for an old Peterbilt cab with faded red paint, parked nose in toward the restrooms. The trailer was a box style, unmarked, with a layer of road grime so thick I could draw a line in it with my finger. The hum of the idling engine was steady, the kind of deep diesel thrum you feel in your chest. I approached from the driver's side, angled low. The cab windows were clear enough to see inside without glare. The driver's seat was empty. My first thought was that he'd gone into the restroom, maybe left the truck running because he didn't want the sleeper to get cold. But then I noticed. The steam dot on the dash, in the cup holder to the right of the wheel, sat a tall travel mug. Steam was curling lazily from its lid, dissipating into the cold air of the cab. That coffee wasn't just warm, it was fresh. If it was fresh, the driver had been there very recently. I knocked on the cab door, hard enough to rattle it. Sheriff's Department. Anybody home? No answer. I tried the passenger side window. That's when I noticed the CB mic dangling from its cord, hanging just above the seat. The little red LED on the base unit was glowing. The mic was keyed, and through the tiny built-in speaker I could hear breathing. Not snoring, not shifting, just slow, deliberate breaths. I climbed up onto the side step, keeping my hand near my sidearm. Come, and knocked again. This is Deputy Lathrop, Taylor County Sheriff's Department. If you're in there, speak up. Breathing didn't change. Dispatch came over my radio. Unit 214. Be advised. Last vehicle registration comes back to a Ralph Edwards 52 out of Amarillo. CDL active. No priors. Truck leased to Lone Star Freight. Copy, I said, still watching the interior. The sleeper compartment curtain was half drawn, dark beyond it. Can you try a cell? Pause. Negative number on file is disconnected. Tugged on the driver's door handle, unlocked. The smell hit me before I even stepped inside. Strong coffee. Diesel and something else I couldn't place right away. Not rot, not blood, but a faint metallic tang that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The cab was neat. Logbook on the dash. Oh, no loose wrappers or garbage. Driver's seat pushed back far enough for a big man. The CB mic was still keyed, the little hiss and breathing looping endlessly like someone holding their breath. It's just out of sight. I leaned toward the sleeper curtain. Mr. Edwards, you in there? Silence, then a sound. Not movement. More like the sound of fabric stretching. I pulled the curtain back in one motion, my flashlight cutting into the gloom, empty. The bed was made military tight. No clothes, no duffel, no personal effects. It's just a thin blanket. It's tucked so precisely it could have been a display unit. But the pillow was warm. My radio crackled. 214? You still on scene? Yeah. Truck's empty, but something's off here. Coffee's fresh, pillow's warm, CB's keyed with. Breathing, but no one's here. Dispatch hesitated before replying, which never happens. Advised, we got another call. Same make and color truck, same plate. Reported westbound near mile marker 327 about an hour ago. Driver flagged someone down asking for directions to this rest stop. Caller says he seemed confused. That was impossible. I was at rest stop 14, eastbound side. If the caller's timeline was right, Edwards should have been here less than 30 minutes after that, and maybe he was. But then where the hell was he now? I decided to sweep the lot. Maybe he'd stepped away. Maybe I'd find him in the restroom. Collapsed, needing help. The restroom building was empty except for a vending machine humming like an insect hive. The air smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. No one inside. I checked the picnic area, the pet walk. Even the tree line at the edge of the lot, where the fog swallowed everything past the first. Row of trunks, nothing. When I came back to the truck, the CB mic was still keyed, still breathing. But now, under the breathing, there was something else. Faint rhythmic tapping. 4 taps. Pause. 4 taps. I reached for the mic. My fingers had just brushed it when the breathing stopped. Air. Then faintly, a voice. Behind you. I spun around, heart slamming into my throat, flashlight sweeping the lot. Empty. I backed toward my unit, keying my radio. Dispatch, I need another unit here now. Possible suspicious circumstance, maybe a missing person, they acknowledged. But their voice sounded distant, like they were speaking from down a long hallway. I glanced back at the truck. The steam from the coffee was gone. By the time the backup unit arrived, a county trooper named Mendez, the cab was cold. The CB was off. The coffee was stone dead. We searched for another hour, even walked the drainage ditch beyond the rest stop's fence line. Nothing, the kicker, came a week later. A DPS investigator called me in to review some traffic camera stills from that night. They had footage from mile marker 327, showing the red Peterbilt. Driver's window down, Ralph Edwards visible behind the wheel. Head turned toward the camera. The timestamp was 1:57 a.m. the next frame. 3 seconds later showed the truck still passing, but the cab was empty. The driver's seat, the passenger. Seat, the sleeper. Empty. I never told anyone about the part that still keeps me up. In that second frame where the driver should have been, the coffee mug was still in the cup holder. And even in the grainy still, I could see the steam rising. If you want, I can go deeper into what Mendez and I found when we finally tracked the truck down weeks later in a salvage yard outside San Angelo, because the story didn't end at rest. Stop 14. That was just where something started watching me, and it hasn't stopped since. I got the writ just after sunrise, the bay air already thick and metallic like a penny held too long in the mouth. Corpus Christi in late August will cook you even before the clock hits 9, and this was my third stop of the morning. The address 218 Sandalwood Lane wasn't in a bad neighborhood. Just one of those sun-baked cul-de-sacs where the grass goes brown in July and kids. Bikes lie on their sides in the yards. The landlord, Ms. Cantu, had called dispatch twice. Before I got there, said the tenant, a Mr. Ellison, was 3 months behind, wasn't answering calls, and she'd been hearing noises in the middle of the night. Beasley, my usual locksmith, was already waiting at the curb. 2 movers leaned on their rental truck, looking half awake. I walked up the cracked path past flower pots gone brittle in the heat, knocked and called out in my official voice. No answer. Through the side light I saw a dim foyer and a pair of work boots placed perfectly on the mat, too neat for someone being evicted. 3 minutes, Beasley said as he went to work on the lock. The tumblers clicked, and when the door swung, a cool breeze spilled out. Too cool. The power should have been off. I stepped in, told Beasley to hold the threshold, and felt my stomach tighten. The living room looked normal at first glance. Sofa, coffee table, TV, but every photo was turned face down. Frames on shelves, on the wall, even a postcard on the fridge, all flipped. A faint smell hung in the air, sharp, chemical, like the old high school darkroom. People do this sometimes, I told Beasley more to fill the silence. He didn't answer. The kitchen counters were spotless, dishes washed and inverted on a towel. The window over the sink had condensation smeared with sets of fingertip marks, one higher than the other, like someone pushing from inside. A cardboard box on a chair was filled with loose photographs, mostly local scenes, but on the back of one, a word was penciled: mirror. Down the hall, the air felt even colder. The first bedroom was stripped bare, a dresser lined with more face-down frames resting on neatly folded cloths. The bathroom gleamed with bleach, the mirror giving my reflection just enough distortion to make me pause. At the end of the hall hung a single photo not turned away. I froze when I saw it. It was me standing in the doorway of this very house, left hand raised to my radio, mouth open mid-sentence. Behind me was Beasley in the threshold, the movers on the walk. Read 8:31. I had arrived at 8:47. Beasley, I called. He came, looked, and shook his head slowly. Tell me you staged that, he said. I didn't. I took it off the wall and turned it face down. In the last bedroom, plastic tubs were stacked high, each full of labeled photos, weddings, houses, strangers. The lid on strangers was loose. I peeked inside and in people, old Prince and then my own face stared back at me, younger, standing outside the courthouse. On the back in neat block letters, Robles knocks twice before he talks. I called for the movers to start tagging items. No reply. At the front door, they stood on the walk, arms folded, refusing to come in. One nodded toward the sidelight. You got a guy in there, he said. Where? In the glass? Behind you. I turned to fast and thought I saw shadow in the reflection, gone before I could focus. My chest felt tight. I pushed on, ending up at the garage door. A strip of red light bled from underneath. I opened it to find a full darkroom plastic on the windows, red lamp glowing, strings with wet prints hanging dripping onto towels. Every print was a room in the house from angles that suggested someone had been inside watching. The newest ones were still developing, one of me in the kitchen and another of the garage door half open, a tall shadow standing just beyond it. I didn't linger. Back in the living room, one frame still faced forward, a family photo of strangers on couch. Beneath it was a slip of paper, a rental ledger with my name as the tenant. Move-in date, June 1st. Notes: does not like his picture taken. That was enough. I posted the writ, locked up, and walked to the truck with the sun burning on my neck. When I got home hours later, my own house was quiet and cool. Every photo I owned was turned face down except one on the console by the door. Thin gold frame. Photo of me standing in my doorway. A folded writ under my arm. Time-stamped. 10 minutes into my future. It was one of those nights when the air felt heavy enough to make a man notice his own breathing. Midland County has plenty of quiet nights, but the oil-field roads out past the city limits carry a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's the silence of land that's been stripped and drilled, of earth that's been hollowed out and left to brood under sodium vapor sky glow. That silence was what I had for company as I rolled along County Road 193 at 3 in the morning. My cruiser's spotlight scanning the mesquite and collie's shoulders out of habit more than necessity. I had my radio low, the hum of dispatch half keeping me awake. The calls had been dead for hours. Every so often a pump jack's counterweight swung past my headlights, its shadow sliding over my hood like the arm of a clock. Out here, time doesn't feel right. A mile can stretch until it feels like 3. Was running plates just to keep my mind from wandering to far every dusty pickup I passed? Every parked oil field service truck pulled off near a pad site? It's something you do without thinking after enough years. See a tag? Type it in? Hear the return? Move on. But then the first one came back strange. The sedan was sitting angled off in a wide gravel approach, one knows, toward a sagging barbed wire fence. Crown Vic, beige, late 90s model. My Alper chimed, screen lighting up. Plate 3HN472. Registered to Midland County Sheriff's Office. Status: retired fleet vehicle. That by itself isn't two weird old patrol cars end up in auctions. On ranches, sometimes still with the push bar or spotlight, but then I read further. Disposition destroyed. Total loss. Scrapped 2017. I sat there a moment with my thumb tapping the wheel. That plate shouldn't exist on the road. I'd been in the department long enough to remember the wreck high speed. Chase gone bad on Highway 191. Deputy Miguel Rivera, 29 years old, killed on impact. The car had rolled twice after catching the median. Roof crushed down to the dash. The frame was twisted so bad they had to cut him out. I remembered the photos at the safety review, the way the metal looked, folded like paper. I pulled closer. Idling slow, my headlights falling over the Vic's back end. The trunk paint was dull and sun-oxidized, but there was no damage, no sign this had ever been in a crash. Clean body lines. Just some dust on the bumper and the faint outline of where a light bar had once been bolted. I keyed the mic. Dispatch. 214. You got a contact for the registered owner on 3 Henry Nor 472? Static hissed. Then Rhonda's voice. 214. That's going to be one of ours. But system says it's been out of service since 2017. 10-4. Can you confirm if that plate was reissued? A pause. Some clacking of keys. Negative. That plate's canceled. Cop canceled. I stared at it, letting my engine idle. The driver's seat was empty. Couldn't see much else. Past the tinted glass. No movement in the shadows of the fence line. No sound but the idling pump jack about 50 yards out. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. My flashlight beam caught the dust swirl in front of me. Tiny bugs orbiting in the light. I moved to the driver's side, cupping my hand against the glass to look in. The inside was immaculate, to clean. Dash shined like it had just been armor. The partition was still in place, plexiglass smudged faintly. But what stopped me was the MDT-hour-old in-car computer still mounted. Screen faintly glowing green with a login prompt. No power cord visible, but the thing was on. Miguel Rivera was on the nameplate above the glove box. My breath felt tight. I took a step back, scanning the dark. The air had gone colder than it had any right to at that hour in West Texas. I reached for the door handle. It was locked. Dispatch, 214. Can you run a VIN check on that vehicle? She read it back then. 214. Returns as destroyed in motor vehicle accident, July 12, 2017. That's in the incident archive. Want me to pull the report? Negative. I said automatically, eyes still locked on the pale green glow inside the car. Copy plate mismatch. I'll be clear shortly. I didn't want to stay there longer than I had to. Something about it itched at the animal part of my brain that knows when to get gone. I backed off, got in my cruiser, and rolled on. Rear view. The Vic sat exactly as I'd found it, empty and still, like a taxidermy of a patrol car. But 10 minutes later, eastbound on 193, my Alper chimed again. Same plate. 3HN472. This time, the return came with a location behind me. I checked the mirror. It's nothing but blacktop and a shimmer of heat from my own taillights. Dispatch, can you confirm location on that plate return? Your unit's rear camera, she said. Reads clear as day. You don't see it? Negative? No visual. I slowed to a crawl, swung my spotlight back down the road. Empty. Kalish dust still hung in the beam from my tires. I kept moving. The pings came 3 more times over the next 20 minutes, always from behind me, always with no visual. Then they stopped. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe the ALPR system had an old hotlist cache. But when I clocked out just after dawn, I checked the rear quarter panel of my cruiser in the parking lot. Faint in the dew was a single oily handprint, larger than mine, smudged into the paint. 2 nights later, I was back out on oil-field roads. The shift was dead again. I was looping the same county roads when I saw headlights crest behind me, closing fast. Crown Vic silhouette, push bar glinting. I eased over, thinking maybe it was one of the guys from the next shift running late. When it passed, the windows were black, and inside, I could swear I saw a uniform sleeve in the glow from the dash. The taillights winked out as if it had never been there, swallowed by the dark, less than 100 yards ahead. The ALPR chimed. Again. 3HN472. My hands felt slick on the wheel. That was when I realized I'd been driving without the radio on. I clicked it back, and the first thing I heard wasn't Rhonda's voice, but the sound of breathing. Not static, not open-air mic. Slow, labored inhaling, the kind you hear when someone's wearing a rebreather mask. It stopped the moment I spoke. Dispatch 214. Radio check. Rhonda came back, cheerful, oblivious. 10-2. You're clear. By the time my shift ended, I'd convinced myself I was just tired, spooked by an old wreck and a weird system error. But when I turned in my cruiser keys, the watch sergeant called me into his office. It had a printout on his desk. Still. Frame from my Alper log. Timestamped 3:04 a.m. The image was the rear view of my own unit. Red taillights flaring. Behind it was the beige Crown Vic, push bar gleaming. And in the driver's seat, plain as day, was Miguel Rivera, eyes fixed on the camera, mouth just starting to open. They still have the printout in the shift room. Every so often someone swears. They see that plate pop up on the Alper during nights on the oilfield roads. And the system still says the same thing every time. Destroyed. Total loss. Scrapped in 2017, but if you're out there at 3 in the morning, and you check your mirror, you might catch a glimpse of a Crown Vic pacing you just at the edge of your taillight's reach. If you do, don't slow down, and for God's sake, don't pull over, because every deputy who's tried swears the same thing, that the second you stop, the car will stop too. The driver's door will open, and he'll be wearing your department's uniform, but his face will look like it did after they pulled him from the wreck. It was a Tuesday night in early September, the kind of night in McAllen when the air feels like it's sticking to your skin and the streetlights buzz faintly. Haloed by the moisture in the air, I was halfway through my shift, parked in the shade of an old mesquite tree beside the lot of Little Angel's daycare, sipping on my now lukewarm coffee and debating whether to risk eating the gas station burrito I'd stashed in my glove box. Dispatch had been quiet for almost an hour, and the radio's occasional crackle was starting to feel like background noise rather than a lifeline. Then the call came in. Unit 12, respond to Little Angel's daycare. Alarm activation. Key holder en route. I was literally 40 feet from the front gate. Unit 12. Copy, I said, tossing the coffee into the queue folder and stepping out into the thick, damp air. My boots squelched faintly against the grass, still wet from the sprinkler system. Daycare's exterior lights were on a timer, so the building sat in a dim yellow glow. its pastel-painted siding looking faded and somehow sad in the nighttime humidity. The place was closed tight. The chain-link fence locked at the front, no vehicles in the lot except mine. I circled the fence line with my flashlight, moving slow, the beam cutting through the thick darkness beyond the light spill from the building. It was quiet, except for the low hum of crickets and the occasional distant sound of tires hissing. On asphalt from the main road, about halfway around the back, I caught it. A thin beam of light leaking from behind a structure I hadn't really noticed before, a squat, weathered shed maybe 20 feet behind the main daycare building, sat near the back fence, half hidden by a patch of overgrown oleander bushes. The padlock on the shed door was swinging lightly in the warm night air, the metal clinking just enough to make me pause. Unit 12, I've got a structure at the rear. Doors secured, but looks like someone's been around here, I said into the radio. Copy, keyholder ETA. For minutes, dispatch replied. The light I'd seen wasn't coming from the shed itself. It was a reflection from my own beam, on the small, grimy window high on the side. Still, something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the fact that the lock looked newer than the shed-bright silver against the flaking, sun-bleached wood when the keyholder arrived, tired-looking. Woman in her 50s named Marlene She was fumbling with her keys, apologizing for the trouble. She said the alarm panel showed a rear motion trigger, no broken windows, no doors ajar, just the sensor in the back playground going off. While she reset the panel, I asked her about the shed. She hesitated like she was trying to decide if she should tell me something, that thing. Storage. Old toys. Mats. Craft stuff. We keep it locked because of the kids. Mind if we take a look? I asked. She sighed, pulling another key from the ring. Sure, but I don't go back there much. Always gave me the creeps, if I'm being honest. The padlock clicked open, and as soon as I swung the door, the smell hit me still air, faint mildew, and something else. It wasn't exactly rot, but it had that deep, old organic smell that reminded me of wet cardboard left in a closed trunk for years. My flashlight swept the space, catching on shelves stacked with cardboard boxes, old paint cans, and bins of plastic. Toys. There was a small, battered table in the center with mismatched chairs around it, like someone had once set it up for a craft activity. On the far wall, tacked haphazardly with masking tape, were dozens of crayon drawings. At first I thought they were just kids' scribbles, but when I stepped closer, the details snapped into place. Each drawing showed a police card, distinct shape, light bar, side decals, and each had a number scrawled across the side in blocky, uneven handwriting. Not just any numbers. License plate. Numbers. I froze, my eyes scanning the wall. There were at least 20 drawings, maybe more. Some had stick figure cops drawn beside the cars, always with wide, natural smiles and big round eyes filled in with black crayon. Marlene stepped in behind me, and I felt her stiffen. "What the hell?" she whispered. My own pulse was picking. Up now. I leaned closer to one drawing, a crude depiction of a black and white, with the number from my own cruiser printed across the side, and below it, in red crayon, was a single word. Tonight. I stepped back fast. My hand went to the radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've got some suspicious material in the rear shed. Requesting another unit. Before the reply came, Marlene spoke again, her voice tight. "Why do those numbers look familiar?" I didn't answer, just kept scanning. That's when I saw them for more drawings taped low to the wall, each one showing a different car. I recognized the plates instantly. They belonged to other patrol units, and the kicker. The plates were all correct for the officers on shift tonight, including the ones responding to my call. The air inside the shed felt heavier suddenly, like the humidity had doubled in seconds. I stepped back toward the door, and in that moment, I heard something. It was faint, but it came from somewhere. Inside the shed low, scratchy, like the sound of a crayon dragging across paper. I turned the beam of my flashlight toward the sound. The corner to the right of the table was stacked with storage bins, but between them was a gap, just enough for something to crouch. And in that narrow space I caught the tiniest movement. A hand, small and pale, moving in short strokes against a sheet of paper. "Marlene, step back," I said quietly. She obeyed, moving toward the door as I approached the corner. "McAllen PD," I called softly. "Come out where I can see you." Hands stopped. Air went still. Then, in one slow, deliberate motion, a sheet of paper slid out from the shadows. On it was a fresh drawing of my cruiser, and beside it, a stick-figure cop standing next to a little girl with long black hair. The girl's hand was holding his. My stomach dropped. I kicked the bins aside in one motion, flashlight high. The corner was empty. Just dust, a few broken toys, and a faint outline of a footprint in the Grimes Mall, like a child's. The other units arrived minutes later. We searched the shed, the daycare, the yard, nothing. Marlene swore the place had been locked. All day. The fence was intact. No signs of forced entry. But here's the thing. When I got back to my cruiser, was something tucked under the wiper. A drawing folded twice. It showed the same image as the one in the shed, me and the girl with the black hair. But now, the stick-figure cop was lying on the ground. Red crayon pooled around his head. The girl was smiling, and in the bottom corner, written in shaky letters, was a single word. Soon I didn't sleep that night. And for weeks after, I swore. I saw her just out of the corner of my eye standing near the chain-link fence when I patrolled that part of town. Always with that same black hair, that same stillness. But she was never there when I looked straight at her. It was the kind of night when the desert feels like it's holding its breath. It's a kind of stillness that presses on your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat in stereo. The shift started at 11 p.m., out on the Devil's River Bridge. The one most folks in Valverde County just call the High Bridge. 270 feet from the asphalt down to the black water. A wind-scoured span of steel and concrete that's claimed more lives than anyone likes to talk about. They had me on suicide watch duty. The county rotates deputies through. That posts whenever there's a rash of calls. Sometimes it's seasonal. Sometimes it's just bad luck. This was my first week back on nights in almost 2 years. I drew the short straw. You'd think I'd be alone out there. But there's a constant hum of company cicadas in the mesquite scrub, the occasional diesel growl from trucks hauling. West toward Sonora and the far-off rush of the river somewhere below. I parked the cruiser in the pull-off near the center of the span, killed the engine, and just sat there with the windows down, radio hissing in the background. About 30 minutes in, I got out to stretch my legs. The air was cool for August. But the wind cut across the bridge in strange pockets, one moment warm and dry, the next cold enough to make my skin pebble. I walked to the rail, shining my flashlight over the edge. The beam never found the water, just vanished into the kind of black that makes you feel like you're looking into a throat. That's when I noticed them. Boot prints. Not scuff marks from a car or the flat oval of sneakers, but deep, sharp-edged. Impressions square heel, pointed toast, tamped into the thin film of dust on the asphalt. They started dead center in the lane, maybe 20 feet from where I'd parked, and headed west, toward my cruiser. Thing was, there were no prints leading up to that first one, just a clean stretch of road, then like someone had stepped right. Out of nothing, the first print appeared, followed by 6 more, all evenly spaced. Then they just stopped right in the middle of the road. No turnoff. No smear like someone hopped into a car, no trail to the railing. Just ended. I crouched down, tracing my gloved fingers along the edges. The dust wasn't disturbed around them, and they hadn't been softened by the breeze that was starting to pick up. They were new. The radio crackled behind me. Unit 2-7. Status check. 2-7. All clear, I said, glancing over my shoulder. But my eyes kept pulling back to those prints. Something about them made my chest feel tight, like I'd just walked into a room where someone had been talking about me. I paced the span twice, sweeping the light over every inch of asphalt. No more prints, no other signs. But the hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I kept catching myself looking east. Down the empty lanes that disappeared into the desert, that bridge has a history. Ask the older deputies and they'll Tell you about the couple in 91 who parked in the middle, left their headlights on, and went over together without leaving a note. Or the hitchhiker in 2003, last seen walking toward the span, who never came down either side. Or the one I remember from my academy days, a trucker who called in a jumper, said he saw the guy climb the rail. When we searched, we found the trucker's cab idling in the middle of the bridge, driver's door open. No one ever saw him again. Still, I'm a practical guy. Boots mean feet, and feet mean a body. And bodies don't just appear in the middle of the road without someone driving them there. It was near 1 a.m. when I caught the movement, a flicker on the periphery. Down at the west end where the bridge lights start thinning out. Looked like a shadow crossing between the guardrail and the beams. I clicked the mic. Dispatch. I've got possible pedestrian on the bridge. Westbound side. I'm going to make contact. Static. Dispatch, copy. Nothing, the bridge is notorious for radio dead zones, but my gut was telling me it wasn't the repeater towers this time. I started walking, one hand on my light, the other resting near my holster. Halfway there, I felt the vibration through my boots before I heard it, a deep, metallic hum, almost like the sound of a big transformer. It wasn't coming from under the bridge, though. It was in the steel itself, running along the rails and beams, humming right into my bones. I stopped. There were more boot prints. This set started on the shoulder. Again, no leading prints, just an abrupt beginning, like the person had dropped from the air. It marched toward the center of the span, then stopped again, exactly where the others had. The hum got louder. My flashlight started to flicker. Something moved just ahead, stepping into the spill of my light. A man, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket and those same pointed boots. His head was tilted down, brim of a hat hiding most of his face, but I could see his lips moving. I called out, "Sir, you can't be on the bridge. Are you all right?" No reaction. I took a step closer. The air dropped 10 degrees, sharp and sudden. My breath came out in white vapor. The man's head lifted slightly, but his face was wrong. Not grotesque or disfigured, just wrong, like it was being remembered by someone who'd only seen it once a long time ago. Eyes too far apart, mouth too narrow, skin the color of wet paper. He took a step toward me. The humming in the steel turned into a low, grinding moan, like the bridge itself was straining under some weight I couldn't see. I drew my sidearm, my voice cracking. "Stop where you are." He didn't. He kept walking until he reached the exact spot where the boot prints had ended. Before. Then he froze, head cocked, like he was listening for something far away. The flicker came again, my light strobing hard now, each time the beam cut out. He was closer. In the last flash before the light died completely, he was less than a foot from me. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I remember the smell. Cold river water, rust, and something sweet, like rotting mesquite pods. He leaned in until his mouth was at my ear and whispered something I didn't understand. The words were soft, but they scraped inside my skull like they were etched there with a nail. Then he stepped backward and was gone. No turn, no walk away, just gone, like a frame had been cut out of the film. The humming stopped. My flashlight came back on. The only thing left were the boot prints, now leading past me toward my cruiser. I walked backward the whole way, scanning the bridge, half expecting him to reappear. But when I reached the pull-off, the prints ended again. Center of the road, no exit. I didn't finish my shift. I called it in, claimed radio failure and a false sighting. No one questioned it much. Everyone's got their own Devil's River story. 2 nights later, another deputy took the rotation. By the end of the week, he'd handed in his badge. Wouldn't say why, but I saw him the day he cleared his locker. He was wearing new boots, the same style, same square heel, and pointed toe caked, with a fine layer of bridge dust. And I knew, deep down, I'd see those prints again. Only next time, they might start at my own front door. The night the call came in, the rain had just started to ease, leaving the streets of Beaumont slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. It was close to 2 in the morning, that strange hour when the city feels hollow and every sound seems louder than it should be. I'd been parked in my cruiser near Crockett Street, sipping the dregs of a lukewarm gas station coffee, when dispatch crackled in my ear. Unit 14, disturbance at the Blue Lantern. Caller reports a fight inside, multiple subjects. No weapons. Scene, I knew the place. Everyone in the department did. It was an old dive on the edge of town, sitting half forgotten between a boarded-up pawn shop and a defunct laundromat. The Blue Lantern had been around for decades, surviving on cheap drinks, bad karaoke, the kind of regulars who didn't care that the floor was permanently sticky and the jukebox still had cassette country tracks in it. I keyed my mic. Copy Unit 14 en route. The rain slick made the drive there quick but tense. The wipers kept dragging against the glass, making that low rubber groan as I turned off MLK Parkway and onto a narrow 2-lane that cut through a stretch of warehouses. The bar's neon sign was still glowing faintly ahead, though half the letters had burned out over the years. The blue was intact, but Lantern was just Lant RN, with the E flickering like it couldn't decide whether to keep breathing. What struck me first when I pulled into the gravel lot was the silence. There were no cars except for an old beige Buick and a pickup truck with a dented tailgate. No music spilling out, no voices. The door was shut but not locked. I stepped inside expecting noise, the aftermath of a fight angry mutters chairs. Knocked over, maybe a bartender pointing out who threw the first punch. Instead, the place was empty. Every stool at the bar was unoccupied, tables perfectly spaced, nothing tipped over. The smell of beer and cigarette smoke hung heavy, but it was the kind of stale scent that felt like it had been sitting there all night. And then I heard it. Music, a slow, warbling tune floated through the air. Patsy Cline, Sweet Dreams? If I'm remembering right, it was coming from the jukebox in the far corner by the bathrooms. The sound was faint but clear, like the speakers were on their last legs, only. The jukebox wasn't plugged in. The cord lay across the warped floorboards, the prongs gleaming faintly under the dim light. I followed it with my eyes twice, just to be sure. Unplugged. Yet the machine's soft yellow bulbs glowed faintly, the song spinning on as if nothing was wrong. Hello? My voice carried far in the stillness. I started a slow walk around the bar. There were drinks on 3 different tables, some still half full. Condensation still streaked the glass of one, the ice barely melted. On the bar top, a shot of whiskey sat untouched, next to a coaster advertising a beer brand that hadn't been sold in years. The whole place had that strange feeling you get when you walk into a room you were certain someone had just been in. But they've somehow slipped out without you noticing. I stepped behind the bar, calling out again. Beaumont PD? Anyone here? Nothing? Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard a door hinge creak. I turned sharply toward the back hallway where the restrooms and a storage closet were. My boots thudded against the warped planks. As I approached, the jukebox still crooning behind me, the bathroom doors were both open. The flickering fluorescent, inside the men's room, buzzing faintly. The storage closet was closed. The creak could have been from there, but when I tried the knob, it didn't budge. Locked. I considered calling it in as cleared, maybe chalking it up to a prank, but something in my gut told me to keep looking. I pushed out through the back. Door into the alley? The air smelled like wet asphalt and rotting wood. No movement, no footprints in the puddles except mine. I came back in through the front. That's when I noticed it. The shot glass on the bar was empty now. I froze. I had been gone maybe 30 seconds. There was no way ice had melted that fast. No way the whiskey had just evaporated. The jukebox clicked softly, the track ending. Another song started, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. The hair on my arms rose. I walked toward it, close enough to touch the glass. The machine's selection dial was moving on its own, the little mechanical arm shifting a record into place. From behind me, a voice said, "You're late." I turned so fast my vision blurred. The bar was still empty. The voice had been close. A man's maybe in his 50s. Gravelly like a lifelong smoker who's here. A stool near the far end of the bar scraped an inch across the floor. My chest tightened. The stool stayed still after that, as if it had only been nudged. I drew in a breath and took a step forward. The air around that end of the bar was noticeably cooler. My breath fogged faintly, even though it wasn't that cold outside. Something moved in the mirror behind the shelves of liquor, not a shadow exactly, more like a shift in the reflection that didn't match my movements. It was faint but wrong. The bottles and shelves behind me looked slightly skewed in the glass, as if the angle didn't line up. I kept my eyes on it, edging closer. In the reflection, I could see a figure sitting at the bar. Gray jacket, head bowed, hands wrapped around a glass. I turned my head to look directly and there was nothing. The bar stool was empty. The reflection, though, didn't change. The man in the mirror stayed seated, slowly lifting the glass to his mouth. I stepped back hard, nearly tripping over myself. The jukebox clicked again. The man in the reflection turned his head toward me and smiled. I don't remember leaving the blue lantern in any sort of orderly way. I know I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on that mirror until I was outside. The rain had started again, soft at first, then harder. I called it in as a false alarm, but I didn't stick around to meet anyone else. I drove straight back to the station, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. 2 nights later, another call came in. Same place, another disturbance. Different officer this time, Mendez. I didn't say a word to him about what I'd seen. He didn't come back the same way. He lasted maybe a week before he put in for a transfer to Lufkin. Wouldn't say why. The Blue Lantern closed last year. Is the building still there? Windows boarded, sign gone. But sometimes when I drive past on a late shift, I can swear I hear faint music coming from inside. And every time I glance in my rearview mirror, I expect to see someone sitting in the back seat, wearing a gray jacket. Head bowed over a drink, and if you ever find yourself near Crockett Street late at night, and you hear a jukebox playing in the rain, do yourself a favor. Don't go inside. Because the next time the man in the mirror smiles at someone, I'm not sure they'll be able to walk away. It was a little after midnight when we rolled under the Pierce Elevated. It's the hum of I-45 above, sounding like a faraway waterfall caught in a storm drain. You could feel the weight of the city pressing down through all that concrete. The dispatch note was simple: welfare check. Female possibly slumped in a silver sedan. Hazards on. Caller didn't stick around. Wasn't unusual for that part of downtown. People pulled over under the highway to sleep, to cry, to do something worse. Sometimes they were just gone when you got there. Sometimes you wished they had been. I'd been working nights for 3 years. But this was my first week back from a stretch of vacation. Ramos was driving, as he always did. He had 13 more years on than me, and a habit of talking like the city was an old friend that could turn on you at any moment. He kept one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting near the spotlight. "Toggle, we'll check her quick," he said. "Either she needs help or she doesn't want ours." He grinned like it was a joke, but his eyes stayed on the dark slant of the ramp ahead. The place was quieter than I expected. The rumble above was muted, almost muffled, like the air under there had been thickened. The sodium vapor lights painted everything in a washed-out amber glow, pillars throwing long shadows that made the gaps between them feel like doorways. The sedan was angled weirdly against a barrier, hazards blinking a slow orange pulse. Light made my skin look jaundiced. Something about that bothered me. I keyed my mic to let dispatch know we were on scene. Static hissed back at me. "Unit 12 to 32, show us it more static," and a thin, high-pitched tone, like a hearing test in a sound booth. Ramos tried his side. Same result. "Dead zone," he muttered. "Concrete eats everything down here." He left the light bar off, just the alley lights on the car giving us a dim perimeter. We approached on the passenger side. Old training, better sightlines. Less risk if they're armed. The rear window was fogged from the inside. It wasn't that cold out, maybe 78 degrees, so that didn't make much sense. The hazard light clicked like a slow metronome, and under it, I heard something else uneven, metallic, like a cartwheel wobbling on tile. It was faint, somewhere above us. Ramos tapped the window with his flashlight. "Houston police," he called. "You okay in there, ma'am?" No movement. He tried the handle locked. I moved to the driver's side. Same fogged glass. But here, up close, I could see something smeared in the condensation. Not words, not shapes I could recognize, just uneven lines like someone had dragged their fingers down the glass, over and over. Ramos gave me a look and nodded toward the hood. We stepped around. The windshield was clearer. She was in there, head tilted to one side, hair covering her face. I couldn't tell if she was breathing. I knocked harder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. I pointed to the lock. Ramos shook his head, mouthed, "Hold on," and went for his lockout kit. That's when the sound above us changed. The uneven metal noise became footsteps. Slow, heavy, crossing the catwalk that spanned between two maintenance towers over our heads. I craned my neck, squinting into the shadows. I could make out the faint mesh railing up there, the geometry of the structure. Nothing moved that I could see, but the steps were definite, measured, and coming closer. I thumbed my radio again. "Still dead? You hear that?" I asked. Ramos froze, listening. The steps stopped. Then the metal tick of something small hitting the catwalk. It bounced once, twice, then clinked to the asphalt near my boot. I looked down. It was a brass button, the kind from an old uniform coat, greened around the edges. Bent to pick it. Up, but Ramos hissed, "Leave it." His voice was tight, like he didn't want to hear himself speak. The sedan's driver suddenly jolted upright. Not sat up, snapped, like someone had pulled a string tied to her spine. Her hair still covered her face. Both hands lifted slowly, palms flat against the windshield. I stepped back. "Ma'am, we're trying to help you." Locked the door. The hazards kept their pulse, but now her hands were leaving prints in the fog. 5 perfect shapes, pressed so hard the glass creaked. I circled back to Ramos, but he wasn't looking at the car anymore. He was looking past it, into the black space between 2 pillars. "Do you see that?" he asked. At first I didn't, then my eyes adjusted. There was someone standing there, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like a dark coat that hung almost to the ground. No face I could see, just absence. And though the air was still, the coat's hem shifted, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing. I shined my light that way. The beam bent, like it was swallowed before it reached the figure. Ramos swore under his breath and popped the sedan's lock with the kit in one practice motion. "Get her out now," he said. Right. I yanked the door open. The woman inside didn't move. Her skin was cold and damp under my fingers, but when I tried to pull her forward, her body was rigid, like she was braced against something. I leaned in to see her face. Her eyes were open, wide, but the irises were so clouded they looked like marbled glass. Her lips moved barely. I bent closer to hear. Her voice was dry, papery. "Don't look up," she said. Footsteps thundered. On the catwalk above us, fast now, like someone running. I felt more than heard, the vibration in the pillars. A drop of something landed on my cheek. Warm. I wiped it away without thinking. My palm came away red. Ramos yanked me back from the car. "We're leaving." I didn't argue. The woman in the sedan didn't reach for us, just pressed her. Hands harder against the glass, fingers splayed, head tilting like she was watching something over my shoulder. We backed toward the cruiser. I glanced once toward the pillars. The tall figure was gone. We got in, and Ramos gunned it out from under. The overpass. My radio crackled back to life before we'd even cleared the ramp. Dispatch was calling our unit, asking for a status. I gave them the short version: vehicle, unresponsive occupant, possible medical. Another unit was en route. We met them 2 blocks away and went back together. The sedan was still there, hazards blinking, but the seat was empty. A sign of the woman. No fog on the glass, on the hood. Right in the center was a line of fresh, wet fingerprints, too large to be hers, too long. Ramos transferred to another precinct a month later, state. I drive under the Pierce elevated on duty and off, and I can tell you the dead zone is real. There's a spot where the radio's cut out, and the city feels like it's holding its breath. I don't stop there anymore. But twice since that night. I've heard the footsteps on the catwalk. Once it was so clear I almost looked up. Almost.